And they took us out of the Southeastern Conference. Yeah, I mean, it's, with those big schools,
Yeah.
there were only 2 private universities in the Southeast SEC at that, when I went to college,
Mm-hmm.
Tulane and Vanderbilt.
Right. Oh, that's right.
Neither of us won very many games.
I think Vanderbilt's still in SEC though, right? Aren't they?
I'm not sure where they're.
Yeah, it's kind of like
Vanderbilt, I believe, was bigger. Tulane is not that big. I mean, the graduate school in Tulane, SEC, is much. If you count medical and graduate school, they had more than half the student population.
oh yeah.
So, you know, and the president wanted to emphasize, scholastic achievement.
Scholarship, yeah.
So the problem was that, you know, they didn't have a lot of easy schools for the athletes. They didn't have a lot of easy classes for the
Oh, right.
athletes.
Yeah. No majors in sports marketing.
If you get a degree from Tulane, they want to make it a real degree.
Yeah.
And not like if you go to school like Ole Miss in Alabama.
Well, they've changed the rules now so that if you haven't used your 4 years of NCAA eligibility, like say you went to, Bunker Hill for 2 years, you still have 4 years of college eligibility. So you can be on the football team as a graduate student. So, which is kind of bizarre.
Was it
So it's MIT, not MIT guest?
Just MIT, yeah.
Was it MIT graduate student?
I don't know.
Oh, you mean the NFL player?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He finally decided to quit. His brain was working too much.
Yeah, that's right. And then wasn't there a Patriots cheerleader that was an MIT student as well? That's the big
Well,
news.
Patriots coach, who's now the head coach of the Detroit Lions, I don't know if he went to MIT, but he was an aerospace engineer,
He went to Rochester.
Rochester.
Yeah. But yeah. Well, and now they're letting the guys graduating from the academies go directly into pro sports without going through service.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
The West Point graduates that I served with down under, I didn't have a hell of a lot of respect.
Were they all pilots?
No.
All right.
Well, one was, we had this one guy who was a battalion commander.
Jerry know who he's dealing with here? He does
that?
Oh yeah. No, we've got
I'm sure.
we got all sorts of buddies in the Trump administration.
Yeah. The guy that I'm talking about was a real jerk. He was West Point graduate, he was like a 5%er. And at the time I knew him, he was the battalion commander. But before that, he was the commander of the air wing of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. And it was called the Caspers. And he was a real jerk. There was one time a warrant officer was flying. The warrant officer decided he didn't want to go through a mountain pass in the middle of a thunderstorm. And he started to turn around, and the colonel in the back seat said, "Well, I've got a blue card. You can go through it." A blue card in the military was an instrument card. You don't go through mountain passes, at least under the instruments we had in the service. Warrant officer went back and landed, and which is rightly so. The colonel couldn't do anything. The colonel also got pissed off at one of the crew chiefs. When you go to refuel, the crew chief has to close the door a little bit to get into the inspection thing. So you have two people doing it. One person refueling the aircraft, the other person opens the inspection to make sure there's no fires or anything else.
Yep.
And he did that, and the colonel slammed back the door, put the crew chief in it, had to spend a couple of days in the hospital. It's, and this is,
Select for such people.
what?
Does the military select for such people?
You get them everywhere, but this guy happened to be a West Pointer, and his own former unit, the Caspers, refused to fly for him.
Really?
And since it was our mission, we had to take the missions. We couldn't refuse. But we submitted a number of unsatisfactory after mission reports. That was one of the few West Pointers I actually knew in the city.
Yeah.
Oh, I know a few actors. I actually served with a warrant officer.
Former president of the IEEE.
Wasn't a West Pointer, but I served with two different guys who were warrant officers when I was there.
Yeah.
Became generals.
Really?
One was, his name was Ezel Ware. He's a black guy, and he wrote a couple of books. I never read his book, but a couple of people that read his book said it was all fantasy. Or at least I've never heard of these places. He knew how to go pretty well. The other guy was Rod Rawlings, who was retired.
Yeah.
He was my co-pilot for a while.
Really?
Ware was a gunship pilot. He was in my unit, so I know him pretty well.
Yep.
But, and then one of my other friends, I actually went to high school with him, went to flight school with him, and then hooked up with him after meeting with a guy by the name of Peter Adams.
Yep.
He's called Pinky. Peter is a direct descendant of John Quincy Adams. And we used to go to barbecues at his place. We used to have lunch about once a month, but we used to go to barbecues at his place in Situate. And he had a couple of generals that lived nearby used to drop in for the barbecue. And Peter passed away a couple of years ago.
Yep. Well, all the senior management of the U.S. military now is from Quincy. General Milley, General McConville, Marine Corps General Joe Dumpert. So, and these are like the Joint Chiefs of Staff for their respective branches and stuff.
No, I think it wasn't like Bush put a push in.
Well,
He moved to Texas, but he was born.
Yeah.
he was born in Milton.
Milton?
Not much of a difference. But
Fellas, come on, just picking up mics.
Yeah. You should have wanted to the election. Yes, you're born in Massachusetts too, so I'm
I was born right here in Cambridge. But I didn't go ahead, Too late. You know who's my Ferrari run that home? Jerry Springer.
I wouldn't spread that around, you know?
I can.
No, he's actually,
Yes.
being mayor. Just because you're on TV doesn't mean you're stupid.
Yeah, Jerry was this too.
That's the thing.
He wasn't all that crazy either, but he could play the guitar and sing.
Yeah.
Can you look something
Yeah,
at?
and
What I need to do.
during our fraternity
I'll
parties,
check.
he would get out his guitar and sing it.
So
two or
the
three
problem
songs.
with this is that the HDMI
Yep.
is a male.
Yep.
Jerry and I dated
it's
the
a
same
tiny-
girl at different
So I
times.
usually need to get,
So you could be on a show.
I
I
could.
need
Take
to
the girl in
get
there
male.
and duke it out, right on the show.
This HDMI,
Right.
We have
or
meetings
I need to do everything just via
every
SSH
4
into
years.
this box.
And,
Oh, okay, because you'll be able
He
to
hasn't come
bring
in
up
the
a
last
second
10 years,
terminal or
but he
something.
did.
or-
Right.
Now,
So the question
12 years
is, what is the
So the last time-
address on this
the last
box?
time I saw
Okay.
him.
It should be on the same subnet.
It should be on the same subnet, and this is on wireless?
This is on,
On,
this box.
That's on Ethernet.
No, excuse me, it is on wireless.
Okay,
I
so-
guess we put it on Ethernet.
Well, we can figure out what it is either way.
We could
Well, we
actually,
could do that, right?
yeah, we could do Ethernet, so maybe that would be.
Because we
easier.
definitely know what it is.
Yeah, then you can figure it out. Nice. And I may run out to see if I have an HDMI connector trunk.
So it's like mini HDMI to,
It goes mini on, it plugs into the device.
and then the regular.
And then regular, and because the way this thing works,
We'd have to do a gender conversion.
I just need to connect these two guys together.
Yeah,
Because this
right,
normally
right.
fit plugs in here, right, so I need a,
Double female. Or,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, or a better cable.
This is
Yeah,
Jerry's
or
friend.
something.
It's me.
Which I may have, maybe not. If I don't, that's okay, I can,
We could SSH it. So you'd have it all on one.
yeah, we wouldn't see you lines. But that wouldn't be the worst, it would still be a useful experience.
Oh my word.
I don't think I have,
I guess.
I'm not cable with me. I don't even have that one back at the office, so.
Yeah.
Which one are you? You're the-
Okay, so here's the secret sauce, which is I'm pretty proud of.
Yeah.
You're the
So
one
if
who's
you guys help.
Alright.
So
Jerry's
this
friend
is
is
a
friend.
range extender.
That's
So
Jerry's
this
friend?
actually is connected to the MIT.
Oh, right.
He's the
Right,
guy
and
that-
wireless, so it kind of like,
He's the guy that
bridges
keeps
or whatever.
track.
Yeah.
Ready to extend. And then it goes from, and then it gives you an
And he's our
Ethernet IP out.
attorney
Which goes
president.
into
You're
these
behind
boxes
him.
here.
Yes.
Which then, so this is the thing I've been wanting to do
Wow.
like,
I never
6
would've-
years.
Oh, that's much easier.
It's so much easier. That way you don't have to do any pre-configuration.
Right,
The
right.
Wi-Fi and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So now this and this are both connected to,
This port?
but I just don't have, the projection screen on this gizmo because of the connection. So I'll see if I get something like that out in the car. And if I don't, that's okay, I'll figure it. And I can do it from the. But I just, isn't it like arp.a or something like that? That does the search or?
Yeah. Oh, that looks right, right? So you're getting, so the 18.21 is the wireless address that you have on, I guess this.
Okay.
That's your public routable IP address.
Oh, okay. So what is it on this? Maybe I'd be better off disconnecting it.
So this is handing out 192 addresses, right? Or maybe that's both of this. That could be the 192 address, the Ethernet address on this. Yeah, I think that is.
Question is, what does this one get?
Well, so you'd have to SSH into this to find out what address that's getting.
Can't you just do like the ARP and only pick up the?
No, it'll only get your, this address. But you can SSH into this, right? From it? It's probably going to default password, right? TP link, I bet it does.
We don't know what the address is.
Oh, yeah, it's this. 192.168.1.1, yeah.
So you think maybe SSH?
Yeah, and then find out what address it handed out to this, although it's a state that it's 192.168.1.100. Yeah, see, so you're in fairly good shape.
So this is the password.
I'll bet you didn't set a password. It's probably the
It's usually crypto.
Yeah, or maybe,
Actually, go to the site, click the ad.
yeah, exactly, it's gotta be like a, do you have a box by any chance?
If you go to TP Link usually you can just look up what's default password.
Yeah, or maybe it's just the same as
Okay,
everything.
Google, what's the default password?
What's the root password for TP Link?
That should be easy.
They put it on the box, I think.
I'm sure that's.
Okay, Google, what is the default password for TP Link?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And go.
Reset.com. The default credentials needed to log into your TP-Link router. The majority of TP-Link routers have a default username of admin, a default password of admin, and a default IP address of 192.168.
That was too easy.
Well, my favorite is charming. There's another possibility.
Unbelievable.
Do you remember? It's scary in my house because I got all these devices on the wall and things. Sometimes a couple of them answer serially.
Oh, yeah.
Do they ever get into fights?
Well, actually, when you watch TV and things, or just the pop up, these things will think they heard a command. Alexa will say something, I don't understand that, or Cortana will come
I have this weird thing where I'll ask a question in one room.
I'm gonna see if I can
and
find
the
that
speaker
connector.
in another room will respond, and
Yes.
the one I'm in doesn't.
Well,
That's really
to the extent they
strange.
coordinate and they figure out who heard it better. It's very early technology. It's when the kids grow up, they don't ask you questions anymore.
Better turn this on now so it's a bit clearer.
Since it's here, I can bring it as well.
Mark, it's 6:52 p.m. and 32 seconds, Wednesday, January 15th, 2020, Blue Meeting.
looks like they have a whole bunch of people doing some sort of gathering earlier.
You think?
Procter and Gamble? Yes, I don't know.
Well, MIT/Sheiva's
Has everybody signed the sign-in sheet?
We still paper sign.
Where did Brian go?
What? Well, I was gonna take a vote to see if Brian would show up on time for the meeting.
So I guess it's yes and possibly no.
You know, he took my laptop off and put his on there, but he has a blank screen.
How about Federico? He's always late too.
Well, I think he said something about getting a piece of equipment. he was
Bob
supposed
hasn't signed.
Oh, has it son?
Aside from
Kurt, just sign in for Bob.
Are you BCS or MIT?
to- or both.
I'm not in my teeth. Don't have the official MIT.
But you were a BCS member back when it existed, right?
Yeah, we'll put RMF.
Put
What?
me in.
RMF.
I remember buying my first physics out from back at the Zoom and Apple Tree.
When we still take library.
I think so.
And Andrew. Everybody in the world.
How many people's phones are
Amber Alert.
What?
I don't have service, so I bet I didn't get that.
About the questions, I also learned what took him so long?
I should check with my friend Bruce, he's a Blue Honda Civic.
6 hours ago.
That's a good use of the tech.
Wait, what happened?
Okay, it's supposed to.
I didn't even read it.
Do you ever see one? Long. Right, I don't remember at all.
What I've seen about Raspberry Pi 4 is the Tiano Core project actually does have a loan for it. The problem is they really need to drop the idea of, hey, let's make it 100% UEFI and simply pass the entire device tree, because that's much simpler and it means you don't have to understand. That doesn't have to understand everything.
Well, did anybody, I was still waiting for the 64.
looking at these names.
Oh, on the.
See if I know any of these guys.
They're still waiting for.
This may be the executive ed program, though, I think.
Yeah, does that happen
Oh,
over here? Have you guys ever seen
Some of
something?
the names don't, can't search them on the MIT site.
Since I'm usually carrying at least 2 phones, I know that it come out to all of them fairly quickly.
32, you have 64 Pi's now?
There was an alert. Pi 4, I think it's the 64.
Yeah,
But they have, but we're getting waiting for the bunch of 64. Yeah, we're going to the UV is closed.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it's the 32-bit version on the one.
Basically, almost.
Visual Studio Year
We do like a really concentrated January.
Surprised they decided to the software.
Basically,
The desktop is the server was. Really so much fun.
basically every Raspberry Pi OS that is not Raspbian has the 64-bit version of the OS available.
But which one, I mean, which one can I run? Right now, this was used I'm open.
Yeah, Ubuntu's got their 64-bit.
Server version, but not the desktop.
That's news to me. I haven't seen, I haven't actually been playing with it. My understanding is that it's basically just enable 64-bit repositories and upgrade everything.
Well, I mean, I've been checking, apparently for some reason, they've only served distribution. Could be, who knows? Yeah. I mean,
Hey, Jerry, it's 7 o'clock now.
What?
It's 7 o'clock.
Yeah. We don't start speaking until 7:15.
challenge I've been trying to figure out is how do I get access, how do I get Grub as a bootloader? Because the thing is, Grub has certain advantages, mainly it is a known quantity and can boot standard kernels or slightly interesting kernels that Grub has the appropriate loader for.
Where's the sign-in sheet?
I don't know.
Either way, standard Raspberry Pi bootloader.
So Jerry,
Guy just came in, needs a sign-up sheet.
we have a raffle before you start.
Last time I did the
Just left.
on the Pi, I think.
So Josh has donated these to
Pi,
BLU.
and then
So we can, if we can think of some good trivia questions, we'll raffle them off.
Very good.
Yeah, I don't see it anywhere.
1%er was giving them away. Does it try to buy one?
So I have a question for the room involving System D, which I know nothing about, and I'm not really sure even where to find documentation on, because it seems to be
Documentation?
I was about to say, it seems one of those modern programs where there is no documentation.
There is documentation system D.
So how do so I have this problem, I have a system that, a Ubuntu system, it's running 1804, but I don't necessarily think that's the problem. It's up to date on all the patches. That when I boot the system, it comes up complaining that it can't find an LVM volume, or at least and it's gonna it ends up waiting a minute and a half trying to find this volume, and and then it times out and continues, and then it complains again, and eventually it puts me into emergency mode and asks for the root password, and I can log in, and it's there. The volume is there. I need to figure out why it's timing out early on in the boot, and I don't even know how to look at systemd log files and figure out where this is happening and which one of the multitude of things that systemd does is the issue here.
I think log CTL or journal CTL.
Journal CTL XB, I think. I tried looking at that, it wasn't obvious, but I'll look at it again.
Yeah.
And of course, certain parties subscribe to the philosophy, well, your problem is system.
Yeah, I know that. I'm not allowed to try to switch things over on this machine.
Hey, does anyone see the guestbook clipboard anywhere? Thank you. Pass it over to Jerry.
First glitch you had,
we
I had
have
on Debian
what would you
9.6
use
after I
guy sitting
repartitioned my
behind you?
hard drive because I wanted more room.
Hasn't cited.
But it only goes through that minute and a half and then it boots.
Wanna bring in the Jim?
Yeah, I think this system had this problem before, but it just delayed booting. Now it drops into emergency mode. I'm guessing that's some warning has now become an error in systemd, so it refuses to boot.
Is the partition encrypted?
No, it's not. None of the partitions on this machine are encrypted. It's a simple physical volume with a single logical volume with a single init. So there's one volume group. So it's not even that complicated. Theoretically, I could convert it to a regular partition if I would wanted to, but don't want to. That's dangerous in and of itself. I think there are ways to do that, but
Might be worthwhile to do.
Well, I like being able to use LVM, I just don't.
Pardon? What are you rapping?
When it drops me in
Two
emergency
magazines
mode,
that
there's something called
Josh bought at Micro Center. One of them came with a
Metadid,
distro
which apparently
CD. I'm
is a
not familiar
system
with the
D
distro.
component running that
From new name
that
and
caches
we'll find out.
LVM data so that
Is that that
LVM
British magazine,
commands,
Linux format?
don't have to like
yeah,
scan
okay. Is that
all
what it
this
is?
on your
It's a British
system.
magazine?
They can just
Oh,
talk
okay.
to the cache.
Oh, that's why we're not familiar with the
I
distro.
haven't yet figured out where the cache is in order to like blow it away.
Have you looked at your Etsy lvm.com file?
Yeah, I've never made any changes to it. I started looking at it. I did find where it actually enables the daemon I'm talking about. I haven't turned that off yet to see if that might help. I don't think I've ever made any changes to that file, so I have whatever the defaults are. But it's huge and it's 99% comments. It's actually hard to find the things that aren't.
Yeah, I actually have a direct string that I use to sort of
It's horrible.
What did you do? What were you doing when it Like, did you make changes to this?
The system had been booted for about 90 days. There have been several Ubuntu kernel updates that I had not yet booted into. There were a bunch of patches that had been installed. I did an upgrade on this machine, so a bunch of things have been installed. I think I decided I wanted to boot it into the new kernel, because it's 90 days out of date. Who knows, there may be security issues I should worry about. And that's when the failure to come up. As I said before, I had LVM problems with the system before, but it would time out and boot, and I had never tracked down. So it may even be that that's not the actual cause. I don't know, because I haven't even figured out yet which particular system D unit is the one that's putting me into emergency whatever, execute or whatever it is, mode.
What's your email address, Bob?
Bogstad at POBox, BOGSTAD at POBox.com.
I got that. It's saying it's an invalid address. Bogstad at
POBox.com, yeah.
Yeah, that's,
Really?
yeah, it's saying the address, I might have an invalid character in there.
Okay. I haven't changed my email address in 20 years.
I know you haven't.
PO Box is really good at filtering out spam. Trust me. But I actually have it forwarded to Google, and I still get about 10 or 20 spam messages that Google filters out after it gets put through PO Box.
I just sent you the home page for System D, but there are a lot of commands: system control, journal control.
All right.
Two others. And also, Christoph did a meeting on System D here a few years ago.
Okay.
And
Must be close to 10 years by now.
what? You can see if you can pull down his slides.
Okay. That's helpful, thanks.
And things to watch out for.
There is, the file system in question is actually the /home file system. And I read something recently about System D is going to like start mounting home for itself, but I think that's not yet out there, so.
Maybe that could be an issue.
No, I did that in 2016.
Okay, thanks.
On the other hand, it is some things that you do want to keep an eye on. If you have the program, if you have the smart ROM tools, that is a good thing to have.
Yep.
And sometimes it's worth checking them, such as if you say notice 1 month, a hard drive says reallocated sector count. 32.
Yeah, I check that periodically. In fact, I think I have the data
and
on it.
then 11 months later, it says reallocated sector count 176. That's a bad sign. That's a, for me, once it's that high and increasing at that rate, that's a, well, it's not actually quite dead yet, but it's close enough that... well, no, that's a close enough that pull it out of the system and get everything moved onto a new media. Pity, since that drive is actually not that old.
You know, there's one more detail I didn't mention. The system had a external USB hard drive attached, which I was using to do automated updates of the main system drive periodically. And it seemed like that wasn't spinning up after the reboot. So I disconnected it from the machine.
Did you have a partition set up for that?
I don't think that was LVM, but I don't remember for sure. I think it was just GPT partitions. It was like a 4 terabyte single partition on the drive. I didn't feel a need to do LVM on a removable drive.
I would recommend it.
There's enough complexity there as it is.
I had a similar problem, but mine, I had an encrypted drive.
I have my laptop used to have an encrypted partition on it.
Yeah, it was this laptop, and I don't keep anything on it that I need. So all I did was just to reinstall Fedora.
Actually, to a point, there are presently 2 available responses that Flash Media can give you if you give it the trim or discard or whatever the heck you want to call the command. Linux, the ioctl is named discard. The problem, the thing is that some SSDs may potentially return random data. There is a way for them to indicate that they will return zeros if you attempt to read a sector that has been wiped. To a point, there really needs to be a third response of being able to tell them, give me an error if I try to access a sector that is blank. The reason you would want to do that is if you had an encrypted area, if you try to read a trimmed area on an encrypted media, the encrypted system should return a 0 block, whereas if the media returns either random or zeros, it doesn't understand that, oh, this is a blank area and it should give zeros.
Good.
Yeah, errors are always interesting.
You might also look at LVM and see.
No, that's the audio or back of
I
audio.
looked at archive. The new file was dated from 2017, so nothing has changed as far as that's concerned at the time.
But that would give you the list of what LVM is looking for.
Okay, that's important.
Is there an easy way of upgrading a RAID pair? Like if I'm running RAID 1 on I have 2 drives that are like, let's say 4 terabytes, and I want to swap in like an 8 terabyte drive.
What's going on here?
So I figured I could replace one of them with the 8 terabyte, and it'll only use 4 terabytes. And then later I swap the other one out for an 8 terabyte drive. But then I want to expand the volume to the RAID on to 8 terabytes. Is there an easy way to do that?
Remove a drive and put a new one in as a pair and have it repopulate the new one. I haven't done. You're talking about LVM RAID or MD?
The LVM is sitting on top of the RAIDs. The basic MD RAID.
I'm pretty sure what you do in that type of situation is that you tell it, simply add this extra drive as a mirror, and it should mirror onto that drive. Then you pull the one that you're going to get rid of and tell it, oh, this is now two. This is back to 2 mirrors instead of 3.
That's,
He wants to
right.
expand the volume. though, right?
Yeah, that's very similar.
That's
to
basically what I've
volume.
done in the past, but this would come like when a hard drive was failing on a server. So when I went to put in a new drive, I didn't want to buy a small drive when it's been like 4 or 5 years since I built the machine. So I want to put in a bigger drive. But I wasn't sure about how to do the resizing. So what I've done in the past is I've just created another partition beyond the ones that were out there. That's just because I didn't know if I could safely expand it without trashing the system.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know how it works on Linux. In Windows, you just say expand.
I mean, you can certainly expand Linux, the partition table and Linux file system, but when you get down to the, and LVM obviously lets you add new volume groups and add new physical volumes to volume groups and increase their size.
I know I have to do it.
It's been a long time since I played with NVADM, but it was possible to add mirrors to RAID 1 array. It is probably possible once all the mirrors are larger than the old size to tell it to always expand. I do know that if you are using ZFS on whole drives, you can do a replace, and once you have replaced all drives with larger ones, you can simply tell it expand, and it will start populating the rest of the space. But I haven't. It's been a long time since I've done such a thing with them.
Yeah, me too. I've got a couple of things that we're rattling off that Kurt brought in. Kurt had a suggestion to somebody who comes up with the best question.
Or, well, either the best question or the best answer. I have a very famous trivia question, but it might be so famous that everybody knows the answer.
Why do you come up with it?
All right, but if more than 10 people know the answer. So where did Arthur C. Clarke come up with the name for his computer HAL?
One step ahead of IBM.
Yeah, exactly.
So Jabber knows it.
Yeah, that's the IBM one, yeah.
Subtracted letters from IBM.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny. If you do the reverse order, it mixed.
I suspect. I am not certain. There are claims that it started from IBM, but there is also speculation that is merely a myth.
It's an apocryphal story. Yeah.
Yes, and that I hate to say it, but I am skeptical.
Well, more than
of
10
that
people
story.
got the answer anyhow, so that doesn't count. We only have 2 prizes.
Okay.
Well, we can separate them. There's a disc in there and then 2 magazines.
Right.
If it's two-sided.
What's the disc?
You just start ripping the pages out. One at a time.
Everybody
Where did
wins.
this magazine
Mix them
come
up.
from?
Everybody wins.
Apparently some obscure distribution that nobody's ever heard of.
Okay.
I have a
Somebody's
question.
heard of it, but
Okay, which is urgently in need of an answer, because if there's no answer, I'm not going to be able to do this presentation. No, but actually not. Let's just, if we could, Jerry, weave it into the presentation. It may or may not turn into a solvable question, but it'll be entertaining nonetheless. And there's plenty of time
Why don't you decide then?
to giveaways, right?
Yeah.
So if anyone overwhelms us with an answer, then you get the first magazine and disc in all the pages that go with it.
But what
Except for the front cover.
Right. Okay. So look. So for the first 15 minutes or so, I'll do this thing on the latest RPi. If you have questions, pepper the audience with them. And then Federico, who is usually unlike the last one here. My goodness, I actually got her. Federico's not here yet, right? Unless he's changed. Unless he's a fake.
Haven't heard from him.
And then Bob Frankston is gonna, do the capstone.
I did get an email from him confirming he'd be here. I think he sent it this morning.
He's anyway, she usually breezes in and he can plan accordingly. So one thing that Federico, at least the last time he was here, had a bit of a splash on was the packaging, the sort of containers in which he stored his, multitudes of gadgetry and things like, I don't know if you remember or not. So my opening tip for the Home Depot, 2 for $10. They have different compartments, and so and you can remove the little separators in it. So from an RPi perspective, if you have stuff that you need to move around, and you do, at least I do, cables and thumb drives and USB gadgets and things like that. These things, Home Depot, are really great. The problem is by now having so many of them. We'll just launch right into it.
Have you yet used resin to turn a thumb drive into a mold and turn it into a severed thumb drive?
I have not severed my thumbs or my drives.
No, all that's been...
We'll get back to you on that, okay? So this is a quote from Evan Upton. How many people have an RPi of some generation? How many people have the RPi 4, the late? Okay, so a handful, which is great. So this is a quote that Evan Upton, this YouTube video, it's out there. It's outrageously different platform. Everything has changed and nothing has changed. So in the sense, and feel free to chime in because I'll miss a lot of stuff, but it's obviously, much faster. That's changed. The price is basically the same. That hasn't changed. The form factor is more or less the same, although they've moved around the USB. They've got the dual HDMIs. The location of some of these things are different. What's that?
USB-C power.
Yeah,
It's USB-C power, but it's really not USB-C power to John's earlier point in the sense that it's not standard. You need to
actually, if you have got one of, if you
I'll cover that, okay? Unless you want to come on up and join me, but I'll cover that. So the USB, so the power, it's like 3 amps you need. The cables are quite different. The quality, your mileage, your voltage, your amperage may vary. So some USB-C cables have worked, at least according to Evan, and I'm not going to challenge him. And some don't. At any rate, what they've done is they have provided a $10 essentially wall wart that you plug in with it. But it's the USB-C connector.
USB-C, I mean,
some work, some don't.
I think that's because USB-C cables there. You need a PD cable.
Right. So in the video here where they address that in considerable length, there wasn't any particular rhyme or reason, or some work, some don't.
But that's a USB-C issue, not a Pi issue.
No, that is very much a Pi issue.
It is a Pi issue?
Yes, it is. It was a mistake on the boards. The funny thing is if you get one after about October, you are likely to get one of the ones that actually has that fixed.
But one great thing came with
So anyway, let me go because I only got a few minutes left.
Just
okay?
Okay,
go first.
No, you just went.
You will. Go ahead.
No, don't worry.
I always defer to you.
No, I was just going to mention. I just is an inline power switch for USB power, which is a great use.
So depending upon what your interest is and your experience level is in this stuff, my advice would be spend the $10. Get the thing in the box that's got the red and white logo from the people who are making these things, and then if you're fortunate enough to have a bin as deep as Bob's with USB cables and things like that, and try it and find out. I actually have had some glitches, and I don't know if it's me, if it's the connector, if it's the cable itself for the HDMI connection. I don't know if it's the TV. I basically have these things displayed on similar big screens to 4K, sort of 40+ inch. You get them for $200 at your big box store. They're ridiculously good quality. And the RPi projects beautifully. The downside of it is that it's got the micro adapter. I don't know if it's micro or mini. I get them mixed up on the board itself to HDMI. So that's another thing that did change. They no longer have the big HDMI connectors. They have the smaller ones in order to make room for dual HDMI out. So it goes from the mini or micro. I get them mixed up. To a male out and then into the. Unfortunately, the connectors up here are basically the big ones, so it doesn't go in. So I apologize. The connector that I do have that goes from male to male is in one of my other Home Depot boxes. So it's been out since. Anyways, so the main point here is that there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of familiar stuff. The examples that they gave in this video of what they're using it for, and if folks who have them here, let me know what you're using them for. They talk about they clearly designed the product for specific application uses. They got a huge customer base, and so they hear a lot from people who have different applications for these things. These are the ones they gave. Dual screens in banks. So people literally are using these things as essentially daily driver desktop machines. And for light applications, for browser-based applications, for even simple, kind of forms-based, more than adequate. Signage, display, kiosk, in elevators, those kinds of things. Again, geared towards leveraging the display system, which has been largely rewritten. They talk about industrial uses, the idea that, of course, it's the British, but lorries, the idea of sticking one of these or more in every lorry truck, delivery truck that goes out for doing different things with it. And they do talk about the desktop everyday computing. So it's running Raspbian, it's running basically the latest version of Debian. If you're familiar with Ubuntu or Debian, then it all comes naturally, okay? What I'm using it for here, and I'll just talk through it, is this is the Alex Cora balls and strikes, measure that you stick it in the dugout. It's smaller, so it's less obvious that you'll be less likely to be. No, anyways, but it's got a camera, and it's also got a microphone. So this is a desktop microphone, about $20, but really solid, kind of on off. It just, again, the beauty of this is that whatever comes with Debian comes with this. So actually, the application of this, apart from being kind of like a little surveillance camera sort of thing, is actually using the audio to record public meetings. So in public meetings in the state of Massachusetts, you're able to essentially record both video and audio. And if you're in a municipality where you're interested in particular things, it's extraordinarily difficult to get really detailed, good recordings, right? And so some places people volunteer for it, some places the local cable operation will do it. But the objective of this is basically to have a thing, you can stick it on a table, and then the demo that I, more or less have rigged up but won't show tonight. So what I have running on that, the RPi, is Node. Have people used Node? Who's used Node? A couple. So Bob and his friend Dave, they sort of, encouraged down that direction. One of the great things about Node, it seems to me, is that it's a fabulous way actually to learn JavaScript. How many people would consider themselves proficient in JavaScript?
Or TypeScript.
Bob's going to push TypeScript or TypeScript or JavaScript or any of those. So actually, it's a fairly small number concentrated in this corner of the room. And the beauty of these boxes, essentially what Node is this guy. Who's the guy who did Node?
I forgot his name, but he's doing Dino. He's moved on.
This is worth a magazine.
Oh, good one.
Anyways, you can look it up. But he'll. So what he did is he took the V8 engine, the JavaScript engine from Google. He extracted it, and I'll give you the first name. I think is it Ryan?
Ryan.
Yeah, it's right. Okay, but you only get you get half the book.
Oh no, I brought those.
Oh, you brought them. Good. Just good one. Okay, so you get a big clue, Ryan. So he took the V8 engine out of the browser, and he wrapped it essentially with APIs and added a few things so that you can do things like basically file I/O and other things. So essentially, what it is a JavaScript runtime that runs typically on servers. And essentially provides all the web internet goodness that you might like, right? And so what you do is you essentially doll, right? There you go, Bob. Like Bob.
I don't think
yeah, Bob's okay. So this Bob is gonna bring his souvenirs in and give them away someday.
Yes. Yeah, I would be in reverse. If I guess, if you take something from me.
Right. Stump him, and if you can stump him. So, but the point is that, and I saw something today. This guy Mosh. Has anybody ever seen any of his videos on YouTube? He's kind of a programming guru, who really likes teaching programming languages on YouTube. And he's done them all, right? And millions of viewers and things like that. They're high quality. They're easy to listen to. And so in a survey he was looking at, actually just posted it today, I think, he said the top three, kind of languages in terms of use, I guess, for 2020. Number 1, Python. People talking about Python. Number 2, Java, and number 3, JavaScript. So JavaScript is everywhere.
If you add JavaScript and TypeScript together,
It's JavaScript and TypeScript together probably bounces it way up to number. Bob really likes TypeScript,
Yes.
and it's got nothing to do with your Microsoft groups. Right? It's just.
in fact, Google uses it. for all their stuff.
What happened to, speaking of which, not to get too distracted, but where did the Google building go in Kendall Square?
Was it Google building?
There was.
There was. Well, so that's another trivia. There isn't anymore, is there?
No, it's
The
still
right next door, they can use the one
They
next
just
door.
expanded it. They just connected
No,
the two
no,
buildings
the-
together.
Monty, when did you come in? It's just
I transported a few minutes
You
ago.
drifted in. What, is there still a Google building there?
Yeah, there's the, you know
Yeah,
what
they
the parking
connected
lot
two
is?
buildings together.
But there's a building that disappeared.
Yeah, right,
Right.
there was the one that
What was
was
that?
there, all the stores down
the
below.
one in between the two Google
So
buildings.
it used to be upstairs over a vacant lot, and now it's a vacant lot again.
So
Or
who owns
it's,
that?
It's a big fountain with nothing above it.
Sorry, I apologize, but anyways, thank you for that. So anyways, that's Node. The beauty of Node is that it's extremely easy to install. It runs fine on the RPi, and as well as on other devices. So even you can do your prototyping if you want, like on a bigger, faster machine kind of thing, and then just bump it down to the and the beauty of Node, similar to the beauty of open source and these distributions, are all these applications or modules or
NPM.
add-ins that through the Node. What's the NP? What's the
NP. Oh, what does NPM stand for?
What's P stand for?
Anything you want to.
There we go. Okay, right.
Package manager, I think.
What is
Yeah,
it?
but they basically,
Node, yeah, thank you.
officially,
Yeah.
it's anything you want to.
So it's a very good package management system. It's a very good ecosystem and so the thing that this box does is there's sort of a module that will record audio, and they're they're a bunch of choices that you have to make. And then there's another module that will take pictures. So you kind of, and sort of the purpose of this demo is you can remotely, wirelessly connected devices and remote control these devices, which in a meeting environment, last night was an example, the guy who was doing the camera work was moving from room to room. He had actually 2 rigs, similar to what John has here, in 2 different rooms. And just to go back and forth in order to make sure they're still going, whereas if you had a rig like this, very inexpensive and easily remotely controlled. So the other thing here that, just to show you the parts, this is something I've actually wanted to do for a long time, where this little box here, it's just a range extender. These are all like under $50 items. So what it does is it takes the MIT, wireless network, and then John earlier in the evening, not to disclose too much, but he was looking for, kind of Ethernet connectivity, and MIT's got a thing that you go plug in their Ethernet things, and they don't connect you immediately. You kind of get bumped out, or they have to validate or certify or whatever. Anyways, what this does is it grabs the wireless stuff, and then you've got an Ethernet out, and then it goes into a little switch box here. So now you literally, and then you can plug in your devices by Ethernet to the switch box, which is, and you're on the MIT net at, more or less, boy, it's like they're coming from everywhere. How you been? Remember? Flare mark.
That's it. IAP. They're all coming back for IAP.
This is like the IAP. Well, anyways, we'll do introductions at the end of the evening here. And so for all these things, you now have, you're in an environment where you get all these little devices that do amazing things in terms of networking connectivity, programmability, and mixing and matching of device types, all for really pocket change is essentially what you can do. Okay, so these are some of the applications, but anyways, my particular interest has mostly been in and around the so-called IoT space. There you are. We're going to have to take another one at the end. The building is, I was wondering whether, okay. So in terms of one of the things that actually, it's funny, they focused on in the video of Eben Upton and the senior engineers, they actually had to redesign the case. They were extremely proud, almost as proud of this case work as they were of essentially the board layout design. They really kind of, went back and did if we could have any kind of case that we wanted, what would it look like? And so it pops open, and it just, things line up, and it looks nice, and it's durable.
It also has a fan.
We'll say that again?
A fan.
A fan?
Yeah, this thing
Is that an
was-
optional? That's something you can plug in. You can.
Good idea.
So people have, and one of the things that we had last time was kind of like a rack of these things, and where you can stack 4 or 5 of them. And the package actually did come with the fans, and I probably should have installed them, but I didn't. This is actually the display of what. So I got these things at Micro Center. I don't know where people bought. Where did you buy yours?
My Ford Micro.
Micro Center or Adafruit, I think is not a place where you can buy them directly from the folks who make them.
Element 14.
Element 14, yeah. So some of these are Element 14. I guess what they do is they basically license the designs.
It's kind of kit or something.
It can a kit, or there are a handful of them who will who manufacture them to the specifications and designs of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, right? And so this actually was all that they had left. There are a couple of these which were the 2 gig ones, and that one in the back is a 4 gig one. I think they're like, are they 25, 35, 45 in that price range?
Actually 35, 45, 55, unless there's a $5 off special during Christmas.
Yeah. So they're all still, reasonably modestly priced. This is just a quick thing. We won't go through it, but all the different models over time, and the big shifts, of course. It's funny. The early ones didn't have Wi-Fi, and they added that over time. And certainly everything has been sped up tremendously. More memory choices now. It seems the 1, 2 gig, 4 gig, probably 2 gig, 4 gig are the sweet spot. The current board, I think, it could support up to 16 gig, although nobody makes 16 gig, sort of the memory on board. They do make the 8 gig, and it will work fine, but I think it was just too cost prohibitive. So they don't have a SKU that does that. Another big design change that I don't know if people have seen this, but they can now basically update the firmware on the boards, which they couldn't do before. And so they've got a utility for that basically zaps the PRAM or whatever they call it these days. Whereas before it basically used to be, I think, boot time stuff that they'd have to load in patches, and they've improved that now. These are the different form factors. Not to get too into this, but essentially they've moved things around, and they've had to do a lot to and they're kind of at a point, I think, where they feel maxed out. Shankar, you may have some other on the board form factor that they have. They're kind of getting to a point where they've packed so much stuff on to be so close that to pack much more on, things like the heat envelope and other things start to.
Yeah, that's what I think.
That's where the fan comes in. So Federico's here, so we'll.
There's already cases of where the HDMI was interfering with the Wi-Fi. There were cases like that.
Yeah.
So everything is now, as you said, so totally packed that there's some interference issues that doesn't happen all the time, but under certain circumstances.
And that actually is thanks for bringing that up, a good example that really had the engineering team puzzled. And they were upfront and honest about the complexity of these things, that it was a case where, and at first they didn't believe it, but it was, the Wi-Fi was basically interfering with the display subsystem, but only at certain resolutions, right? And so some guy on Lifehacker or someplace, got out the gadgets to measure all this stuff, and proved it to sufficient clarity that they agreed. And in fact, they implemented a fix, as far as I know. I actually haven't, embarrassed to say, I haven't done the firmware update, which is, I think, how it came about. It just really hasn't been. Anyways, this is all cribbed from Wikipedia. They have a very good historical. Federico we kind of talked about a historical look back and on some of these devices, and there's really just so much that has changed. Micro USB, we talked about that. The power supply. They relocated some of the ports. They now have USB 3, so 2 USB 3 ports. So it's the other thing is they got full true gigabit Ethernet connectors. So in the earlier versions, what they somehow did, I don't know exactly how, but they basically spliced off some of the USB lines to do networking stuff.
Do you know what the throughput is on the gigabit port? No, it's a real.
They claim it's true full.
900 something megabits, I think.
So you can get full wire speed out of it finally. Okay, that's a big deal.
Yeah, so that's a big deal.
From my understanding, what actually happened on the older boards was they actually had a chip that was basically a combined USB hub and Ethernet port, and what happened was that the gigabit Ethernet was effectively plugged into a USB port.
Right, right.
They had a Ethernet to USB 2 bridge. So
Right.
the USB 2 max speed is for 80 megabits a second.
Yeah.
So you couldn't, even though the Ethernet transceiver and all that was capable of a gig speed, but upstream bandwidth was limited by this bridge because you were now going over USB 2.
That part showed up on a lot of SBCs. That must have been the cheapest Ethernet chip on the planet.
What do you want? 64-bit desktop.
64-bit desktop, I think.
The default is 32. And I know Bud does not should be 32, 64 desktop. Is that easy?
I don't know.
The reason
Is the Raspbian, is the current Debian downloaded? We'll have to come back on
The
that.
reason is because
I was gonna ask a question.
What's the question?
I'm curious, do you know anything about the new 3D graphics pipeline? Just trying to get good information on that.
I don't, other than I don't know if there's a footnote here or not, but that actually happens to be the thing that they claimed was, new, improved, open source. So that is the one area that they really highlighted, is relying more on open source than before. So, but maybe we can follow up on that.
Yeah,
Sorry, I don't know.
the reason I bring up 64, you have to know you want to use Visual Studio Code, and the recent ones use 64.
Gotcha. So the 64-bit and the display stuff. Okay, well, breeze. Turns out that this is the screen resolution thing that Shankar was just talking about. So in addition to this is an audio jack, one of the few in the maybe systems devices out there that you can still get, good old-fashioned audio jack. The other thing is it's got the latest Bluetooth on it, and which really works pretty nicely. So this happens to be a Bluetooth speaker. I've used USB microphones. I don't think I've used a Bluetooth microphone on this one, but it's all really kind of cleanly integrated and works well. These are the backs of some of these devices. This purple one in the middle, which is a Vonets one that John had suggested, it's got the same, again, it's kind of a useful little device that essentially lets you extend the wireless to have connectivity with your, this is the Node stuff. The Node is, again, okay, so Node is good, right? And SOCKS, so in terms of, one thing that really does somewhat, surprise me, I guess, still to this day. So in the early days, many years ago, right, when some of us were doing Macintosh-related things, the beauty of that Macintosh toolbox was just, it seemed like everything was there, everything was accessible, all the subsystems, they all had beautiful APIs, and there was, and all the guts of the machine were really accessible. But to this day, to do, a decent video or decent audio in the Linux world is really not an easy thing to do still. And you would think it should have a really clean API, it should all be, high quality and easily accessible, and it's not. One of the things I went through was of course in the browser, you've got the user media stuff, and all of that really is, somebody has gone to a lot of work to weave that into the browser, but I haven't quite figured out how to extract it yet. So these are just some of the Node things. In terms of management, I don't know if people know what this SSH, FT, the file system. I really couldn't get the SSHFS to work. So the claim is that essentially what you're able to do is you're able to put up file shares, and the idea would be you could share the Raspberry Pi to easily move files back and forth. What's that?
Instead of SMB.
Instead of SMB. And so the promise is that this SSHFS is, it's more integrated, it's better than SMB, it's easier than SMB.
That's part of Unix builds?
It's all like basically SFTP and SSH, but kind of bundled together. But then what it does is it'll, I think, carry over the mounts from boot to boot to boot, so you don't kind of lose them. I was not very successful getting that to work. It turns out the Raspberry Pi has a beautiful SSH server on it. It's beautifully accessible from something like FileZilla, so you just boom, 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 and you're in. You can move things around, and so you have
Also VNC.
What's that?
You also have a VNC server.
Which I have not used.
Oh, sorry.
I guess, okay, so VNC. mic and camera. These are just some, selling JavaScript. Here, actually, here's the, just so you see, programming scripting markup languages is your favorite one on the list. Well, they were selling JavaScript on this one. Go was on another one. But that's pretty much it. So I don't know what else I can tell.
If
Questions?
If they don't have C on there, they're selling something.
I think it's a popularity
Well,
thing.
that's all respondents, that's not developers.
Ah.
Developers the second tab.
Yeah. But JavaScript first.
Well, they don't have
they're
Go
selling
either,
something.
so that's, but Go is for, yeah, sorry, question.
Well, it says markup languages.
Question about
Really
your
bad.
notes. Do you know if that case is ESD safe?
Ooh, I haven't I haven't static nullified anything at this point in time. I've dropped it. I think I haven't seen any sparks fly, so I don't know. It was Home Depot, but the price was right. That is actually a good point though, because you start to go through a lot of these. I actually just was over at the store that shall not be named, right? And because I got one of these things in the mail for a free either micro SD card or thumb drive. And so a 32 gigabyte SD card, micro, $4.99.
Yeah.
Which,
So it's what,
what's that?
That's crap.
Yeah, but the thing
It's
is,
overpriced.
it's overpriced. You're saying it's crap, and he's saying it's overpriced. We have a market. We have a market for it. Any questions? Giorgio, how you been?
Actually,
So Giorgio, just so not to put people on the spot, but so he had actually helped my daughter doing a thing with quadcopters and stuff like that, and Kurt's Soldier Design Competition thing some time ago. And anyway, so we're going to have to catch up. And Monty, we goes back to the early days of Lotus and modern jazz and the stories that he won't talk about, I'm sure, but I will someday. And so anyway, any other questions on the Raspberry Pi stuff?
on the other hand, if you see someone claiming to be selling a micro SD card that is 1 terabyte for $10, run away. Do not walk. Run, because it almost certainly isn't what you want.
Yeah. I guess if there were one thing I would say in terms of coming away from this, experience with this, for under $100, if when you think about when I think about all the money that was spent, John, remember those Mac bottom drives for 5 megabytes for like $2,000, right? and so now you get the full stack. You get for the hardware. Maybe Shotcar's got something even better coming in later in Q4. But when you think about what you can do with again Linux and the beauty of these distributions, and in the programming languages now that are all and of course it's all you can prototype on your laptop and then you can just move it to these smaller devices.
And Microsoft has also made .NET for it. You just write directly, so all the tools are becoming available.
Yeah. So the tooling is really revolutionary. So okay, that's if there are no other questions, that's Federico, you're up. Thank you very much.
You didn't finish the raffle?
I didn't even, I tried. I tried to start it and I just
You were heckled out of a raffle?
yeah, no, I was Ryan Dahl. Ryan Dahl? Or was he like a
Dahl, yeah.
Did he do like comic
Oh,
strips?
you win.
And he didn't even use Google.
Yeah.
Magazine.
There's magazines.
It's like
How old is
December.
it? I didn't.
It's like December.
So just
Last year.
Current.
so Linux format. These are the magazines. Since
Format.
Federico is who we are. Linux format. You can. The issue we asked our experts. Linux format has outgrown 8 bits.
It's about removing Google. Is the issue. As
Can I unplug you, Brian?
You can.
Google,
Yeah.
I think it's double-sided.
I'll clear as much stuff as. Sorry, I have plenty of stuff.
Yeah, it has the CD.
QR code.
I got the one that Federico will know the answer to. What was the first release of Ubuntu called? It wasn't Amorous Aardvark, I'll tell you that.
Fortunately.
What year was it?
First year of Ubuntu?
Isn't that a trick question?
It is a trick question. Because it wasn't an A. It didn't start out with A. It started out with W, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's
So
a
does
war
that-
hog?
Actually, printing
That was one of them.
That was the first.
Was it really the first?
Was that the first?
I don't know.
I think that's the first name I ever heard. Might not have been the first one to, but it was probably around the time.
You can't use an adjective to warty to describe a warthog. Maybe they could call it warthogish.
What's that?
You want to start the recording for the other two presenters?
Yeah,
Oh, I turned it off because you were last year.
Is that what happened?
It can't be the first one, is it?
Oh, fantastic.
I got the live stream from this. So, it's not as good as the other one. I remember.
Even too easy.
Let's see, we figured it out last time.
Actual release was in 2004.
2004 was where you went. Is that where they came up? Is that why they started with 4 instead of 1? Because of 4.10.
You've got a male full-size HDMI, that's it.
Oh, this is for an iPhone.
And a set of pliers.
Too many options here.
Are you sure that's the...
Warty Warthog, and then Worry Hedgehog, and then Breezy Badger, and then Dapper Drake,
That's when they started going to alphabetical order.
and Edgy F,
Yep.
Feisty Fawn, Dusty Gibbon.
Okay. But that is still not working. So,
See, they just added a street. You know how the streets are in alphabetical order down Boylston Street from Boston Common, Arlington,
Right.
Berkeley,
Dartmouth.
Clarendon, Dartmouth. Okay, so they renamed whatever it was called. It's
Which
now,
letter?
Jersey Street is now Jersey Street again. But it's
Oh.
because they took it back from, it was named after the Red Sox.
we're working one of them.
Right, oh, that happened a while ago.
Yeah.
Right, it was
But I didn't-
Yorkie Way, and then they renamed it.
But I didn't realize it was the next letter in parallel to those other streets. So
Yeah, but it was on the other side of Mass Ave.
Oh, right.
Hereford.
Hereford, and then is there an I?
No, Hereford's the last one, and then Mass Ave.
All right.
But there might be an I on the other side.
But it is, so it was probably Jersey Street to keep that naming convention. But then there's nothing after J, right? There's no K Street, except in Washington, D Street.
Okay, I have that. Side screen. I think that we discovered last time we had power side.
So it was Ipswich
Oh.
and Jersey
Hey, Kirk, you know how to operate that?
and Kilmarnock.
No kidding. So they go all the way at least halfway up the alphabet. Let's see.
Looks
I
like
think
it's
Federico's trying to get the overhead projector onto the second
Because
screen.
we got that working last time, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't bring mine.
It's just a little tricky.
Actually, one thing I should mention that just as these guys are getting set up, that struck me, it was in the Wikipedia post, on the Raspberry Pi. I had not noticed this before, but they now are basically guaranteeing or committing to the life duration for which they'll be continuing
The laptop
to
is fine, I
manufacture.
can get that.
So,
What I'm
you know,
not
before
getting
it was a little bit of that
What's
feeling,
on
of
it?
buy it
Is it
today and,
HDMI
you know,
or-
3 months from
The
now.
dock camera
But now I
has
think
its
the
own
Raspberry Pi
wire.
4s, which did come out probably
So
6
it's
months
this
to a
one
year
here.
earlier than they might have speculated based on their typical development cycle.
And it should be
But
here
I
on
think
the
it goes
side
out to
screen.
2026 or
There's
something
the
like that. It's either
conference.
4
I
or
just
6
read
years.
that.
I don't see it up on the
Looking at the
conference.
website, I think that's right.
Is
The
that,
confidence
which to
doesn't
me
work,
is,
we figured it out last
is
time.
striking, right?
But
That
blank,
if
yeah,
they're
that
gonna
works.
commit
I'm
to
fine.
continuing to basically sell and support that board into 2026, it's kind of a safe bet.
That sounds like commercial customers.
That's commercial customers, right?
That's
right.
people who want that.
Right. So that clearly has, I think that came out. We talked about fleet management, kind of lorries and signage and manufacturing environments. That they clearly started out with education in mind, and it's still a charity, a public charity in the UK. But clearly the stuff that they've done in this latest version is
I'm not
definitely
sure
taking a
what
turn
it is.
towards the commercial markets. And that's probably what it's going to take to keep the platform viable and sustainable into the future.
Did they say what their end of life plan is? How they'll roll that out? You said 2024.
I thought it was 2020. Was it 2026?
2026.
It's in the Wikipedia, and so it's now much more akin to kind of like what Microsoft does with
Not sure.
cycling. You know, Windows or
It's fine.
or-
We'll do without it.
Yeah. So I don't think they're promising that they're going to that they're going to be in business forever, or what they're. But I think they're currently the format, the plan basically result of the cycle is something better comes out, and that's going to replace the. I don't know if I've ever used the same chips two products in a row.
Yeah, you just move to the other screen.
The Wikipedia thing is
Yeah.
really comprehensive, and it tells you what all the different chips are.
DVI is not
But originally the business model of them being able to kickstart this thing was, so Evan, as I understand it, he worked at Broadcom, and he basically pulled a Wozniak, and he got the chips that they were basically thrown out the back door. Not quite, but they were the lowest powered chips that they were willing to sell to him for this purpose. But he's managed to, kind of climb the technology curve with these newer chips that have come out, which are more and more powerful. So.
Right.
Anyways, but the fact that the product life cycle is kind of guaranteed into the future, it's a safer bet to invest in, I think. You okay with your settings and stuff?
Says that we have to turn it on after we select it.
We may have been Eben's first stop in the U.S.
He did.
Yeah, because
You
he
went
knows
to
John
that, right?
Masters from the old world.
Yeah.
So he came here and did like Raspberry Pi number 1.
Which broke, I think, during the demo. As
Did it
they
really?
passed around the SD card thing. I remember that.
Yeah.
I was in that talk. And
Yep.
as it was passed around, I think the SD card ended up broke, so you couldn't actually use it.
Right.
Well, it's as finicky as last time, so we'll do it without it.
There's no compute version.
Yeah, they've had a couple of different products off to the side, the compute chip or board, or what, and those actually don't seem to fit into the same category of going to support it, forever into the future. So I think some of them are more experimental, and maybe some of the ones that are more commercial.
They typically come a little later than the standard board. So like we're talking about those like whatever on module.
Yeah, the ones that are like programmed.
Right. I think typically they get them out like a few months after the.
All right, so let's get started. We're not going to get the
Right.
projector to work without spending another half an hour. Not sure why. It's working perfectly fine here, but it's not working. So this was meant to be just looking at one new piece of hardware that just came out a couple of months ago. This is the new SheevaPlug. So those of you that remember, about 10 years ago, the first one of these low-cost Linux SoCs was the SheevaPlug. It came out with an Ubuntu 9 something version, and it was 32-bit ARM. I don't think it was even Cortex.
No, it was Marvell.
Marvell. It was Marvell.
Right, it was an ARM v5.
Yes,
You're right.
Marvell, like strong ARM.
I wonder if they still have them.
It was the ARM v5 from Marvell, which is not even the same one. That's right. Marvell is now a much bigger company, and it's not in the business of making SheevaPlugs anymore. But they licensed the idea to Global Scale, which was the OEM for the product anyway back then. And now there is a new SheevaPlug, the SheevaPlug 64, that has just come out a couple of months ago. And so it's sort of a blast from the past. I thought we'll take a look at that. I ordered one before it became available, so these are literally from the first batch, and it arrived, I would say, a couple of months ago. They were supposed to be available in the summer, but they were late. This one is, in terms of casing, exactly the same as the original SheevaPlug. Let's see if we can make up with some pictures for what we don't have from the projector. So, aside from the label, that obviously is different, the form factor is exactly the same, and these were back then referred to as plug computers, since the single board computers like the Raspberry Pi were still somewhat in the future. Effectively, it is a single board computer with a slightly more robust form factor because of the case. Typically, these would be deployed with a plug only and just attached to the wall. The limitation back then was the fact that these were Ethernet, so you had to have an Ethernet jack next to a power plug. And they were more expensive. Now they're slightly cheaper. But besides these differences, they're effectively pretty much the same. They have 2 Ethernet ports instead of 1. They have 2 USB ports, and I think, instead of 1, that also has changed. There is a micro SD slot that is just about the same. And there is a USB port for console and a micro USB port for just any use you can think of. So you have 3 USB ports you can access and 1 that is a serial console. So a few more connectivity options were brought up from the chip, but effectively it's pretty much the same format as it was before. These became pretty popular as security industry devices. They were a convenient way to do penetration testing because somebody could break on your premises and install a computer in some semi-hidden fashion to do the audit and try to see what they could do to your network. Obviously, after you authorize to do that, we hope. So they became an early pen testing device. This version has Wi-Fi, so the biggest shortcoming of the old versions is being removed. And I guess having the same form factor is to some degree a standard. I thought that it was amusing that they're keeping the form factor to this extent because the console port is a mini USB, not even a micro USB. So it is exactly as the old one used to be. Now, because I still have a little bit of embedded engineer left in me, I always have a mini USB in my bag. So that is not a problem. The problem is the projector is not working, but since we can see what the device has externally this way, that is fine. There is a pinhole to do hard reset somewhere on the system. Let's see.
Yeah, number 4.
Number 4. So it's right there next to the USB for your paperclip pleasure.
Don't stick the paperclip in the wrong spot.
Yes. And externally, this is about it. So it's a Raspberry Pi that you can field without people destroying the board after 5 minutes because you don't have a case. That is the way I look at it. Now that it is 64 bits, you don't have the problems that you used to have with the old boards, which is that because they are 32, let's not do this yet. Because they are 32 bits, you cannot find a reasonable distribution for them anymore. You can probably deploy Raspbian on them, but I don't know that it's worth the trouble anymore. They are seriously underpowered devices at this point. So
what's the price?
The price is $89 for the version without Wi-Fi, and I think $105 for the version with Wi-Fi.
Does that say gigabit Ethernet?
There's 2 Ethernet ports.
They are labeled gigabit. Yes. You know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, it's that ASICS chip again, I'm telling you.
That's right. That's Kurt's favorite chip. And you can actually tell because this is the CPU. It is the CPU of my favorite board. Sarcasm still implied. Which is it's the Armada 3720, which is the chip that Marvell made for the Espresso Bin board, which is a $39 Raspberry Pi-like board, not in form factor, but in kind of use case. The difference is that it has a SATA port and it has 3 network ports. And the other claim to fame is that this was 64 bits in 2016 when it was originally released. So it was a good way to get a 64-bit chip early. Most distributions are rather unstable in the Espresso Bin, so that's the part where it's my favorite. But the core is fine. It's an ARM A53, ARM V8 64 bits. It has the same price point as a Raspberry Pi, so that's fine. The chip has anything you can possibly imagine. Obviously, USB 3 is in there, but somehow the board, the SheevaPlug has USB 2 due to the gateways discussion, to the bridges that we were discussing before. I don't know why I haven't gotten to that. I frankly don't care about what USB is. I was looking at the network more. What else do we have in the specs? So it's 64-bit ARM, 2 gigabit Ethernets. We're saying optional wireless wall power plug format. I don't remember how much RAM is on this thing. Let's find out. Is it 512 or is it 1? It's 1.
Sure. That seems rather little for an $89 board.
I don't need to do this way. Let me do it the proper way. So we had everything already opened. Might as well use it. So, besides the plug and choosing whether you want it with Wi-Fi or not, there is this option that if you're familiar with global scale devices is basically giving you a Java distribution, since there is some licensing involved there in some form. That was always the case with the SheevaPlugs. It's 1 gig and it's DDR4. The part that is not so nice is that if you go looking at the memory bus of this chip, it's 8-16. So memory bandwidth is not impressive. But okay. We covered pretty much everything else. There is an RTC battery. I forgot that. Cool. So it does remember time. That is actually quite nice. It's up to 1.2 gigahertz. I think the one I have is clocked at 1 gigahertz. This is one of the things that happen with this particular Armada chip, which is that it seems to be quite unstable when you overclock it. So most of the builds for Armbian that you see have been downclocked in the BIOS, in the kernel, and at all levels. People seem to prefer running this chip at 800 megahertz, even though it can go all the way to 1.2. This one, out of the box, I believe is running at 1 gigahertz when I booted it earlier today to do the checkout. We will see in a minute. What else do we have here? Dimensions, you can see it. It's about 10 centimeters by 7 centimeters. And what else is there? Manuals and stuff like that, which we will look at.
So at this price, who's the same guy?
At this price? What is M7?
In other words, what's the market for this?
It's pretty much the replacement for old SheevaPlugs.
Okay.
So if you had an application that was already targeted at SheevaPlugs, now you can do it with a modern distribution rather than maintaining something that's old. I think from the point of view of new markets, I would say it's you want something that's like a Raspberry Pi but already has a case, and it's, I wouldn't call it ruggedized, but at least it doesn't fall apart just because somebody is touching it.
Actually, you could use this. So you plug this into your power outlet, and it bridges Wi-Fi to something else. So if you've already got Ethernet on your power cables,
So it's Pi. So
right?
it's equivalent of the case.
Okay.
And the thing is that you can get 4 gig Pi and just
With the Pi 4, I think
and
that
you can get a case and power supply, and okay, yes, you have to assemble, you have to put the bits together, but the thing is that it's a faster processor.
That's right. So that's why I think that the market really is replacing all the SheevaPlugs that are out there with something modern. Because
but it's got 2 Ethernet.
it's got 2 Ethernet, and you potentially could have Wi-Fi.
That's handy.
Yeah, but Ethernet confuses things. If you've got home P&A, you're in business, right? You walk into some place, you plug this in, and you're on the internet. You're bridging either you're bridging it out. It's like the TP links.
Yeah.
You're either using it as a wireless access point, or
So what else is here? As I was saying, 8 16 bits memory bandwidth. That is the part that sucks. The SoC itself has a lot of network interfaces, so it's a question of what is getting brought out and how much CPU do you have to push real gigabit speed. That's the place where you really have to test it. There are some offload engines, as usual. And I think that's it. Oh, there is frequency scaling, which is something that got in the kernel late for this Marvel chip and has been blamed for some of the instabilities, but I find no evidence that that is the problem. I think it's something else.
So it's got limited applications.
Well, it's basically, there are a bazillion SoC boards. You have to find a reason not to use the Raspberry Pi these days. Like, you want a SATA port? Okay, go get the guy with the SATA port. Or you want to replace an existing SheevaPlug? Get the SheevaPlug 64.
the frequency scaling, that's just traditional user land governors, or is that something else?
It has a standard governors, yeah.
Like the Dustin Kirkman stuff.
And it doesn't have graphics or display.
No, it's headless.
No, it's what OS is it running?
It's running Ubuntu. Again. Used to run Ubuntu 9, now it's running Ubuntu 18.4.
So it has no HDMI or anything like that?
No,
Oh.
no, it's still headless. Like I said, the form factor is identical. That's why we have the mini HDMI cable.
So how do you sort of manage it when you first plug it in? I mean, is the
I'm
problem
going to show you right now.
Okay.
It's got a serial port that's attached to a USB adapter.
So,
which is actually fairly handy.
You could actually do this with the Raspberry Pi. It's just that most people don't want to do things the embedded engineer way, and that's why the Raspberry Pi is a video chip. Well, it has video chip because you want to use it in education applications, and you need a video for that. But the Raspberry Pi has serial interfaces, so you could do exactly this. All right, so we're going to come up.
Yes, the SheevaPlug comes with its own, basically TTL to serial adapter.
It's
on
true
board,
ARM v8, not ARM v7 like the Raspberry Pi.
No, even the Raspberry Pi 3, the later generations are actually ARM v8 as well. You just have to tell it to boot an appropriate kernel, or you have to give it an appropriate kernel, or you have to use a
so it is
that has the
there
appropriate
is.
version.
So this is like
That's
I said,
easy.
it's an ARM
That is
A53
really
V8. But out of the box, this comes with Ubuntu preloaded on the flash chip. So there is an SD card. You can boot off the SD card like you do with the Pi, but there is onboard flash, and it comes flashed with 1804. So you plug it in, you power it, and assuming that you have the serial port already set up, this is where you get the interface. There is another way to do board bring up, but this is the easiest one. On Linux distributions, the serial to USB driver is there by default. At least it is in Ubuntu and Fedora. I don't know about the other ones. So you can plug in this way with a Linux laptop straight out of the box. In the Mac, you have to identify which of the serial to USB chips you have and install the right driver. Same thing on Windows. There are two versions. One I think is Prolific, and the other one is FTBI. But once you're past that, you're done. It's just another port. So
use like screen or something on that.
I'm sorry.
You can use like screen.
Totally. But this looks more Mac-like. So, okay. So I'm not going to walk you through the conventions for Mac serial ports because this is not what we're here about. But it's you just set up the serial port at the right speed, and there you go. And pretty much all serial port communication these days is always with 115, 8, and 1. So.
Does it support USB boot like the redoubtable Panda board?
Yes.
Really?
You can boot. No, you can boot from the SD card or from the USB. I think so.
Okay, that would be pretty cool.
And because, and you know how I know? Because this is U-boot.
All right.
So you can do absolutely anything your twisted mind can conceive.
Fancy boots.
So, because we don't have UEFI or any other horror like that, but there is U-boot here, you can literally do anything imaginable. So you get here and then you can boot from any device that you can connect to the system. U-boot, for those of you not familiar with, is the bootloader of choice for embedded devices. And it's really a nice environment to work with because it's used for board bring up when you don't have Linux yet. So what you do is you get U-boot to work, and then you have enough facilities to debug the rest of the hardware.
So you're using a 2017 U-boot. Is that the one they told you to use? That sounds awfully... It's up at the top. It had your U-boot version. Yeah, 2017 March Armada.
Yeah, that's what they preloaded.
Really? That's interesting.
It's a build from 2019, but it's a version from 2017.
Oh,
and that makes sense because the chip was merged into the Linux kernel between 2016 and 2017, so they must have done the board binary support package around that time.
Okay.
So as I was saying, the CPU is running at 1 gigahertz here. It's a 2-core CPU. The DDR is running at 800, and we have 1 gig of memory.
Does it throttle the CPU or no?
It does. That's where the CPU governors that we were discussing come in. And okay, let's boot so we can see the rest of this stuff. So I was trying to fix one thing and I couldn't, which is that this in the default configuration wants to bring up all network interfaces. So now we're going to get lots of timeouts for about 1 minute or so.
All right. Now, if you just shove an Ethernet cable in there, whether it's plugged in or not.
That's what I thought. I was actually at MIT all day. I was like, oh, I'm going to get Ethernet at MIT, no problem. So I did exactly that in building 26, and it wouldn't work. Spent like half an hour doing that. Eventually, I just gave up. But let's see, there is another thing I can show you in the meantime, which is here. Oh, it's not come up yet. When this boots, we're going to see the Wi-Fi access point over there.
There it is.
Ah, there it is. So there is an interesting thing going on there, which is the documentation of this thing is horrid. Well, actually, no, I'm being too harsh. But there are some inconsistencies in the obvious. For example, the documentation says Wi-Fi access point has no password. Lies. What is the password? Nobody knows. I mean, I only spent half an hour, so I didn't find out. I was trying to configure it with my own password, and there is a script to do that, and I'm missing something because I set up a password like no way or something like that, and the script would tell me yes, it's on. Then I connect. I get the connection for 1 second, and then I get booted by the system. So there is something else going on. But the board comes up by default as an access point. Once we figure out what the default password is there, that is a convenient way to do bring up without a serial port, obviously. You just plug it in and connect with or without password, whatever it is, and then you can SSH in. The only problem is you have no way to discover the IP address. So if you go back to your Linux journal collection, I think in 2008 or 2009, I wrote an article on how to discover headless devices. There are a bunch of scripts in there that can publish the IP of a device that just woke up to the world and can publish it using the NS update, or it can publish it locally to the network using Jabber. So if you have a Jabber account, it can send you an IM message saying, I'm here. Or it can...
That's what we needed.
Or it can use the NSSD and broadcast locally. So I had these three solutions saying, here. Doesn't matter what system you're using, here is how you do it.
Should be using that for Ethernet.
They're all in Perl, I caution you, but they work. They're actually quite nice because Perl makes them short. So yeah, you can get your Linux journal collection. There is the only article I ever wrote for Linux journal has that stuff. So let's see if this is up. It should be. So talking about lies, the documentation says either there is no password or the password is. Ryan will remember what the default password was.
Shiva.
No, it was no soup for you.
Oh, that's right.
You should have typed it enough times by now.
Is it still that?
That's what the documentation says. Lies. Again. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have a brick device tonight. I discovered it this morning. I checked last night going, oh, it's all set up, no need to image cards. And this morning I'm like, oh, I can't log in. Because this device is from the first batch, they made the first batch with default passwords admin. And then, like a month later or a week later, they decided to go back to their traditional no soup for you. So if you go to the documentation, it says no soup for you, but the password is really something else.
Because they had all those boxes that were printed up with that password.
Actually, no, because it's not in the boxes. The boxes come with no documentation. This is something that you just download from the website. It's a PDF file. So, but who says people don't read change logs? I work at Red Hat. All I do is read change logs all day. So I went to the change log and I found that immediately. So after 5 minutes of heart attack, I fixed it. Now, as you can see, it's stock Ubuntu to the point that it's actually advertising my old Ubuntu Advantage product. So this is a very plain distro, very nice. Of course, to the chagrin of the gentleman over there, this terminal doesn't do NC, so if we try to do top or something, this is going to be horror show. So
what's the default configuration of it?
We're going to do something else so that we are a little bit more comfortable. So this is very convenient because you can scroll back, but it doesn't do NC characters. And sadly, it's the best serial terminal application for Mac. So if you don't have anything better to do, you want a hobby, update one of the Mac applications for serial, and developers everywhere will be, well, some developers, me, will be grateful. So we're going to disconnect here. We're going to do things, where is it? The old-fashioned way. I cannot use my quick terminal because it's not going to work on that screen well enough.
No, the old-fashioned way would be you would have to plug in the dumb terminal.
Oh, come on. We're not that old. All right. So we can do exactly what was being suggested, which is throw up and use screen. So, or maybe we can't. Oh, no, we can't because that's right.
What's the bit rate?
Exactly.
I know what that looks like.
You have been here before.
Yeah, why would it, over USB, I would expect it to be simply USB speed. It's just that the bit rate is effectively what it actually sends it at.
Have you forgotten that standards are eternal? Somebody could be doing 9600 baud connection for all time's sake. I don't remember which order you put screen.
Punishment of red hat is put you on 110 baud.
Given that it's basically a USB to serial adapter, it really should be set up as it does the appropriate speed for the plug, and whatever you tell it to use as a baud rate, it just pretends to accept it. And just lies about what it's doing. It just always does the same baud rate.
Strange. Screen has decided it doesn't like the serial device. Are we not disconnected there?
It says disconnected.
Access is denied. Something is going on with your ports.
Well, you didn't close the. Did you
Log
actually
out.
close the screen session? I think you still had that running.
You have to log out?
No. No, we don't do that. That would be the Windows solution.
It didn't look like you closed
Yes,
the window.
I'm checking.
Still live.
No, it's my fault. It's because I killed the terminal the hard way. And that brought down the serial port without resetting things. So
It's locked up.
yes, exactly. Okay. All right. So now we'll do it softly. All right. Okay. So what can we snoop around here? I think I already said it, but it is Ubuntu.
You need to see in Etsy.
Whoa, why am I not getting
It's
all?
spelled Etsy.
Yeah, but I was hoping I was going to get tab completions. And I don't seem to be. So no surprises there. Something more interesting. This is probably too much. So, network interfaces, we have a bunch. Yeah, the problem is that we lost the scrolling by going from that to this. So, we have LAN, which is one of the physical ports. Obviously, loop back. There is a bridge configured between the two Ethernet ports for reasons that are probably connected with the uses of the espresso bin, which is typical to build switches. And
Actually, one thing I
there's
discovered.
WAN, which is the other Ethernet port, the other physical port, and the access point 0, which is the Wi-Fi.
Actually, one thing I discovered about Linux's software bridge is that if you have it on a LAN that is set up to support jumbo frames, it can continue accepting 1500 byte frames, but if you run out of memory, it will start dropping jumbo frames while it's still handling the 1500 byte frames just fine. Which is wonderfully annoying when you suddenly when you're able to ping it just fine, but for some reason
It seems
things are being
perfectly
dropped.
reasonable. It seems perfectly reasonable congestion and handling to me.
Not really.
Depends. As a network guy, I would say it is. As a user of your setup, I would agree with you. So nothing too strange on the USB bus.
that has Wi-Fi too, right?
This one has. They don't all have to have it. And like we were saying, it's configured as an access point out of the box. What do we have? 25 BOGO MIPS. So obviously the delay loop is set for consuming as little power as possible. And we can kind of see that because there is the EVP, the event stream extension, which is used for power, sleep, and wake up events. It's wake the chip on an event. So it's used to put the CPU in a lower power state until something happens. The rest of the extensions are encryption stuff like EAS and SHA offload. By the way, if you have read the news SHA-1 this week, you can actually choose your collision. So it's not just vulnerable, it's completely broken.
Wait, what now?
As of this week, you can actually select the SHA-1 collision text you want, and it will build the collision. So it's in a funny URL like sha.mblog. It's shambles, spelled in a funny way, and they have a proof of concept check. So SHA is gone, but we knew that. CRC32 obviously for checksum offloads. Floating point, which this is being ARM, is considered an extension. DMUL is multiplication without carry, which is used as far as I know for elliptic curve crypto. So it's another crypto offload thing. And that's it. This is clearly not a phone chip like the ones that we used to see in older ARM devices. This is just a low-cost embedded device. It's a V8, nothing too strange, 2 cores. This could go up to 1.2 gigs, but it's set to 1 for, nobody says, but I will allege that it's the stability reasons that are all over the internet. What else do we have? F-disk. Let's see what's in there.
So this is the $89 SKU you have?
This is the 105, the one with the Wi-Fi. What else is here? Oh, this is a terrible way to look at it, so let's not.
Hard partition?
It was F-disk dash list, but with no scroll back, it just takes too much space. Maybe we should go back to the Mac terminals. Here we have the one that matters, which is, no, this is the boot sector. Mounted on root is an XT4 file system. And if we go to mount, we'll see that it's 4 gigs. That's the flash size. And then, what else do we have? Oh, one thing that I was looking for, because some of these devices have Wi-Fi but not Bluetooth, is does this have Bluetooth? And it looks like it does.
Is it wireless? Right, it's all full version, yeah.
Not all chips have everything.
I know.
This one seems to have it. I haven't tried doing anything with it, but I suppose as a pen testing device, it does make sense to have Bluetooth.
Hey, Federico, it's getting kind of late now, and Bob hasn't come up yet, so
Right.
There won't be
So-
any audio or anything, right?
No
No,
audio,
just
nothing
video.
of that sort. So last thing. Understood. Last thing. What was it? Oh, the Wi-Fi. We already discussed that. So you've already seen pretty much what we know about the Wi-Fi. But the way I would set this up is that I would use one of those notification scripts that I was describing, so that at boot either publishes an IP address to your home DNS, or it broadcasts locally on the NSSD where it's living, or it sends you a Jabber message, one of the three, or all three if you want. At that point, you can use it headless without ever using the console, because you can just connect to the Wi-Fi in one of the 2 modes. You know what the IP address is, and you SSH it. I think we have a bunch of details of the microchip, but I think that the important part here is really what we were saying about the memory bandwidth. The rest is all fine. And that is it. So,
Thank you. Now we get Bob Francis.
oh, my bad. I need to shut it down.
I'll set this up.
This is a signature of the A3700 Marvell chip, which is that when you shut it down, it panics. Every single board that I've seen with this chip does that.
So don't panic.
As long as it's only on shutdown, I guess it's okay.
We're lazy programs.
They should have really cleaned up that, but it happens pretty much every time I shut down the board.
So when was the first SheevaPlug? Approximately? Because we did the solar wire, we did the solar thing, right?
Yeah,
At the same time.
that stack of SheevaPlug.
And I remember, did anybody remember the name of the guy who was the engineer who came out? We had like 10 of them.
Robbie Curry.
That's unbelievable. And he literally programmed these things in zeros and ones to get them to boot.
Yeah.
I remember he had them all laid out and he got it onto the SD card and he was doing DD this and DD that.
Yeah.
And wow.
Must have been around 2008.
There was somebody else besides Global Scale that was founding that. You remember there were two different, we had the Global Scale and then there was another equally popular vendor.
Yeah.
According to Wikipedia, the original SheevaPlug was released in March of 2009.
2009.
That makes sense because the Ubuntu distribution was a 2009 distribution.
You see if I can get the confidence mode.
We'll set up.
Okay.
Hey, Federico, is that your cable off for?
I'm sorry.
It looks like a USB cable or something below there.
Anybody out there? Actually, by the way, this view was taken from a 100 mem drive. So it's almost a view you get from here.
It's an interesting game.
So I'm going to turn the lights on this cable.
It's too bright up there. That's the problem. It washes on the screen. No kidding.
It should start.
Yeah, really far away. One way
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. This is a very flexible tool, so it depends on what you're interested in, what you want to hear. So I'll give you some options. One, after talking about these large supercomputers, I could talk about, I talked a little about this last time I spoke, this level of computing, what it can do with it, and how we need to reinvent the internet. At the other extreme, I could talk about how software makes us rethink reality. So that's it, So which do you prefer? I talk about sort of very pragmatic talk about these devices and implications, or talk about how to rethink reality? Any both?
Actually, rethink reality sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll show you a few minutes on this project and get to rethink reality. So, very, very briefly, if I can figure out what key to press, how do you get to the next slide? Oh, I know, it's wrong. Okay. So I'll give you a few seconds on this. The main thing about these, so I don't know if you were here last time, but this is basically a device from a company in Bulgaria called Shelly, which is basically an ESP, I keep forgetting the number, chip. But what's interesting about it is it's a building block. Unlike everything which tries to be very smart and everything, it's a very simple building block. And if I get up the slide and put it into paint mode. So in this case, the project was to take my doorbell, the rear doorbell in particular, and wire it to the front door. Very simple project. So in this case, I take the doorbell, which is this wire. Oops.
We don't see what you do.
Wait, I want to go back. I want to put that back to ink mode. There. Ink. Oh, you have to choose a color.
We don't see that.
What? You just see this. Now I can point to the doorbell, which is here. So this wire goes to the door, just the button, not the doorbell, the button. One of the problems, we use these terms interchangeably. And the device is very simple. I've got a power supply, which is 12 volts. And I take the doorbell, and this wire, I need to generally be careful about, color coding, we'll get to that. But basically, the power supply comes in on this, positive and negative 12 volts. And there's a switch closure, so the doorbell basically taps off the negative and brings to the switch. Fairly simple. And these other two wires are relay closure that are controlled, that can be controlled. Now, what makes it interesting is that's the basic function. Just a little aside, you notice I labeled 12 volts. The default is to use 110 or 220 volts. And almost all my lights are that. But the problem is, you make a little mistake, and you get this big flash. So it's much nicer to work with 12 volts. Even with 12 volts, if you get the polarity wrong, it can melt the whole.
Sorry, did you fry that? Is that what you're showing there?
The middle one, it did not get fried. The connectors got fused.
They get fused.
So it's technically fried.
But in this case, I did literally melt through the plastic because I had the 12 volt backwards. But it works otherwise just fine. They're very resilient devices. And you can get it with UL approval. For 12 volts, I don't worry. For the current one, I'm now doing it. So when there's a fire, I hope they don't find the ones that are not UL. But the main point here is these are very simple building blocks, and that's what I find exciting. There's a little aside, is that this TC53, which is an ECMA committee, which is JavaScript modules for embedded systems. So just as mentioned Node, I can actually go down to this level and use JavaScript and TypeScript, my programming language, for embedded devices, which is a whole topic in itself. It was very exciting because it turns these devices from worrying about the hardware and all the C++ crap to actually focusing on the problem at hand. And you still get great performance, but you actually get the project done.
So what does this device do? It's basically like a Wi-Fi bridge for electrical signals or something?
Well, this is more than that. This device is a web server in it. So this is a little zoomed-in view of the web server. It also does MQTT protocols. It can a cloud server. It has a protocol CoAP, which is a lower level protocol, which sends out messages so I can listen to whenever the device is. So I can, one thing I do in my system now is, no matter why you turn the light on, I can get a message, the light's gone on, and detect it. I can mount these behind light switches and turn the light switch into a smart device. It still look like a toggle switch. I go into, there's so much flexibility to go into it. Just one little thing is, the switch is labeled on and off. I mount it upside down, no problem. You just tell the software to reverse the sense of on and off. But in this case, what I did was I put this URL in here. Now, you notice it's a number because there's a little site and it's HTTP. That's because Google and everybody is working to make for the web and not for local devices. So we don't have a good DNS substitute. I wanted to put like an MDNS address, but didn't work. So for now, I just have the wiring address. This is not my real IP address, but that's another story. So it just sends a message to another, just in this case, to another Shelley on the network.
Shelley is
the company's called Altico, but it's Shelly.cloud in Sofia, Bulgaria. The nice thing about the rest of the world is they're not trying to be unicorns, they're creating good stuff cheap. So this one on the right is the receiver for the messages. Now in this case, I was careful about the color code for the power wires. So red for positive DC, black for negative. And as you saw from that hole in it, I'm careful. But in this case, I'm only using contact closure. So in effect, I've split the function apart. It's just sends the message. The one on the left is to the front door. In this case, I detect the contact closure here, and in the same device, I control the relay. By that, the relay can do 110. It's a relay. There are other versions that are, could do things like non-dimmable LED. You can't dim a dimmable LED, but I can dim a non-dimmable LED because remember the fast response is just flashing, and you can dim an LED. So this is this is now goes to triumph for the back door. This is the front door, it's a self-contained thing. Now, so why would I have the front door go through this? Well, because other devices can listen on the message, I can build on it. So it's basically it takes the physical world and makes it accessible.
So the neighborhood kids, what they do for your house is they try to break into your 802.11 network and have your doorbell ring itself every so often.
Well, no. Right now, I'm depending on the firewall, which is risky. We need to have a device with intrinsic security. So this is more reason we have to basically clean up the mess with it. Right now, we still have version 0 of the internet, which basically is still more like the telco. You root of things, everything's connected in. If you're trying to do cooperating device independent of the rest of the network, there's a problem. And again, each of these are long topics. I'm doing the short run through.
Is this actually using Ethernet or is this using 802.11?
It's usually these are wireless devices.
Yeah.
Okay. I have 180 Wi-Fi devices in my house so far. Okay.
It blows at night.
What? It works fine.
That's more like don't bother with the firewall. That's Tempest shield your house.
Keeps the bugs away too.
Again, so we flash my lights. I don't have epilepsy. I'll be annoyed, but I won't go crazy. Basically, the design point here is agility and learning what you can do with this stuff so you can actually figure out how to do it right. And my next column is about what we call communities of things. Because right now, when you secure everything, you worry about all the network level stuff and all this things, which is just like writing C++, distracts from the problem. You really want to think in terms of the community devices that share the secret and not have to think anything about, quote, security of things. You just say among these trusted devices, but that's got to be abstract in software. So all this stuff about putting a shield around your house, well, I might as well think a moat, How many people have windows in the house? If you have a window in your house, why do you complain about Wi-Fi security? The kid, of course, with the binoculars is going to read your social security number off checks and things. The things that get real. Or that little drone that passes by is going to record everything. It circles the house a few times when you're not looking and shoots away and everything's done. So I'm not, I'm trying to balance this. I also have other devices and things. But the interesting thing here, though, is this wiring closet. Let me go back one, actually. So in this case, if you take a look at it, this is so I have a Nest here for my front doorbell, a Nest Hello. And the problem is it does 24-volt battery voltage. It does not send an API signal because Google has said, oh, just kidding, we don't really believe in APIs. We just believe in extracting revenue from you. And then they realize, but it doesn't work. But we'll go to that. So I have a relay that turns that 24 volts into the contact closure for the Shelly. And here I've got a DC power bus. The little thing here, you see this little thing? I should change colors maybe, but right here, that is, I found these nice screw terminals, you put them into the DC power supply, give you labeled screw terminals. So all these little things, make it easy. And last time I also showed you these lever nuts, so I can really work with 110-volt AC safely. And if you ever work with 110, you got the screw terminals. They're dangerous. You got to hold all the wires at once. Whereas with lever nuts, you hold one wire at a time. Of course, I always turn the power off. I haven't killed myself yet.
Your wife isn't the necromancer.
What?
You aren't married to a necromancer.
No, but I do have a brain surgeon on tap, or a brain scientist, in case something goes wrong. If you hear a loud scream from Newton's set, come on. That's a whole discussion how to work with electricity. I got these nice pliers that say they shield you from up to 10,000 volts. Okay, so this is the more detailed view of the relay, the power bus, just indirect connections to try and control the stuff, but that isn't important. And the rest of it is I then have a device from a company called Habitat, which allows you to bridge Zigbee and Z-Wave into it. I've got other bridges for Insteon and stuff, but I didn't want to, I just wanted to give you a sense of that, what it takes. But the main thing about the doorbell project is that relationship between the back doorbell and the front device actually extend through the world. And that's the important thing here, is that I can, or should be able to, this is what Google says, because it's web only. So it wants you to use web certificates, and it'll complain. I mean, Google is not exactly my friend here. But what it can do is take that relationship. I can basically take that doorbell in theory, put it in my pocket, take it anywhere in the world, it'll still work. Now, in practice, I do that. So I've shown this before. So this is my light switch app. It works in the house and anywhere in the world. So the reason it can do it is that I don't depend on it being a reserved path. I basically accept best efforts packets, which means that the relationship is independent of what's in the middle. It does not depend on a reserved path or everything in the middle doing the thing right. So I can put shims in, I can put forwarding in, I can do all these hacks that are transparent to the relationship. And that's really the important message, what the Ethernet is separating the relationships from the crap between. So it's a bit kludgy now, putting up URL things, but ultimately the goal is to basically maintain that relationship between the inputs. And what that means is that, in terms of public policy, so I'm pushing for is what I'm calling public packet infrastructure, that basically is the infrastructure you can use to assume connectivity. So what does it enable? So if you're in the hospital, say, and you're connected, basically given a monitor on your wrist, and that's not that complicated. You can have a heart monitor, glucose monitors, and it can work in the hospital. You go over their Wi-Fi network, encrypt it, all of this. Now, when you leave the hospital, why does that stop working? If you use these protocols properly, it should just work anywhere in the world without you doing anything. We have a public policy designed to make that not work. For no reason other than basically the funding model of their infrastructure is you prevent people from communicating, so you create a fee, you charge a fee. Now that works for the web. The reason people accept it is that when you go to a Wi-Fi access point, it says type an agree screen. Agree to what? You don't know. But you agree anyway. Or you might have to type a password or something like this. When your devices can't do that. And when we do have a device that's a monitor, it has a bucket brigade that goes from here, you pair to here, to this phone, hopefully the SIM card works, all things in the way have to work just right. I switch phones. this watch says, now reset so you can repair with this phone while my other one's going to be repaired. You know, in other words, we have something that barely works for browsing, which is the design point. So that's why we don't have something as simple as a connected health monitor. But it's pretty trivial. I mean, if you think about it, once you define the relationship between the device and the monitor in the hospital, it could be a wire, it could be an EKG, whatever, that relationship should just work anywhere in the world. And if you have that, then you can have the hospital computer. In other words, let's say you can do a lot of it locally, but let's say you need to do a lot of analysis to look for patterns to say you're going to have a heart attack in the next 30 minutes. You might be able to be able to figure out such precursors. Well, this should be able to, tell you where it is, and you can have an ambulance meet you there easily. I mean, technically, you get policy about false alarms and all that, but technically, it shouldn't be that complicated because the encryption part should be factored out by Community of Things. The relationship should just be maintained. All this. So that's really the point of this extending the doorbell is the prototype for connection between two endpoints anywhere in the world. And the question is, why is that obvious? So one of the reasons not obvious is people want this thing called 5G, which is, the more I look at it, the stranger it is. How many of you know what 5G is or heard of it? Okay. You're embarrassed? Okay. 5G is the future. We're going to get 6G, the thing of the cellular.
Honestly, it's bullshit.
Yes, that's quite literally what it is.
No, but basically it's a 1970 phone network. And we need it because for the national problem we have is we don't have enough remote virtual reality. Or autonomous cars are not connected. I don't know. You make up whatever story you want. They say low latency is necessary. But the real problem is the paywall, and that's what's preventing us from connecting. So this is why we need so I'm glad people see this is nonsense. It's becoming increasingly obvious. But the thing I'm trying to explain is why we need to fund this as common infrastructure rather than have a paywall.
Well, the autonomous vehicle argument is spurious.
One would move most surgery even better. It's called murder. I mean, I could go in technically all the things, but it's silly. So that's why this public packet infrastructure is a big public policy thing that we need to work on. So I'm interested in people who, very interested in helping explain it and, push it. Now, and requires, better security models, but simply as a starting point, I should be able to, now this is not the old municipal Wi-Fi. Municipal Wi-Fi was an amenity, even when you have a typical logins, it was really web-oriented. What we need is infrastructure, means it's got to work everywhere. So you fund it, if you want an area, it's a dense geographic footprint, not just hotspots. So wherever you are, it's available. And it's got to be paid for by the community. It could be a very local community. It could be an apartment house, it could be a city, but and anybody can extend it to their basement without getting permission. This is different than a lot of the public nets, which are very complicated, geeky things. They don't have a funding model which works in cities. But that'll be transformational. So that's something I'd be very interested in working with people, on moving towards. Okay. So the other quick thing before I get to rethinking reality is, this is something more just from CS. How many people have heard of automotive grade Linux?
I saw an article just the other day.
Okay. So it got renamed this year, I forgot what it was called last year, Open something associated. So I've been trying to figure out what's happening in cars. So how many people know about QNX?
Oh, that's good. I do. Yeah.
Okay. So QNX basically was bought by BlackBerry. BlackBerry renamed itself around QNX. So last year I learned about the design of QNX. Gord Bell was there last year. So basically, cars now are basically there's at least one computer, infotainment and aspects of cars, that is a lot of VMs on a hypervisor or a base QNX or Linux with virtual machines, and some are real time. There's a real time. It's some mixture. So that's ongoing, and I think the impression I got is the car company is still trying to figure out what this is. But one interesting thing is there'll be app stores, Android environments, etc. So in this is a sense the companies that at least have some participation. Mazda says they're going to be putting this in the cars next year.
I heard theirs was slow.
What?
What they have now is slow for
Their car computers?
Yeah, it's slow to boot and stuff.
Well, we can
They
ask
need to replace it.
Seth this borderline. Is your Mazda computer slow to boot?
Yeah, really good.
Okay. So you can ask
It
for
takes
another.
about as long as the engine takes to warm up. So,
So we'll see whether one about it really starts here. Okay. So that was one talk. Now the other one, I can do the 4-minute version or the multi-semester version. The same slides, it's just a question of how fast I talk. Let me get rid of this.
Then there's always the Hyundai cars where their infotainment system, it will happily talk to a phone via Bluetooth, but the problem is that the system boots up and doesn't wait for Bluetooth. They'll simply start playing random radio station on you, and it's kind of like, oh my, it's kind of like, oh god, this is horrible. I've encountered a few rental cars, and
well, there's a whole. I mean, one of the interesting things I hope from this whole thing. The problem is it can take a long time for people to learn things. Is when I rent a car, I should be able to bring my settings with me and my user experience. I should just have a screen and say, I want to buy my interface separately from the car. So you rent. How many people when they rent a car can figure out how to operate it? No, you can't wait. You got to get someplace. You got to drive out and hope you figure it out while driving. And one of the worst experiences I had with this, or most troublesome, was I got a Prius. I was on 880 in California in the rain, and I could not find the speedometer. It turns out that one of the rental slips had blown in front of the speedometer, which was in the dash. And it was dark, so I couldn't see where it was. I just figured I've driven without a speedometer in the past. I'll manage. Or the timer into the car, and
GPS.
I had the navigation. I threw navigation systems in the car. I had a Hertz one, there was a Cadillac built-in one, and there was my Waze. The Waze just gave me destination, but the car was telling me how to get back to the rental place. I didn't realize that the built-in navigation was still trying to get home. So, okay, so let's switch topics now. I don't want to go too late because we're over time. So, the age of software. This is a talk I first put together for 4-minute Firestarter last summer. Where's the control panel screen? Did this go to the next screen? No. Quick, interesting question. How does this thing work?
does it work?
Well, there's supposed to be a control panel to go to the next slide, but I can't find it.
Arrow key?
What?
The arrow key will do
it. It should. So let me stop this and start it again. Slideshow from the beginning. If it doesn't, we go to single screen. I'll just page through it. Okay, I've got a single screen. F5. No. F5. There. Okay.
Spacebar.
I did spacebar.
Just press
Oh, just forget it. We'll do it this way. Okay, so get past the geek humor. So what I pointed out is that we've had a history of ripping things out of philosophy. We took math out of philosophy, we took physics out of philosophy, we took psychology out of philosophy, and now software we take abstractions out of philosophy. What's left? So, and when I think of software, ultimately it's an articulate understanding of abstractions and concepts. It's language. It's given us a language for things that have been built up before. So let's look at the history. There was a von Neumann architecture, which was basically this breakthrough idea that the instructions in the computer are just data. That there's no difference between the data we operate on and the execution engine we use to interpret. So we just interpret numbers as instructions. And that seemed, probably at that point, quite a hack. But, over time, it really developed a very deep idea. That we sort of got the power of gods. In the old days, there was a sharp distinction between direct and indirect. But once we had an execution engine that could read instructions like we can read a recipe, things became interesting. Okay, I've got to go down manually. So one first major step was automatic programming, otherwise known as Fortran, which was really focused on numeric calculations. How many Fortran programmers do we have here? Glad to see. How many people still use Fortran? It's still being developed. It's still evolving. Amazing.
Yeah, I know, but it's not.
Almost like COBOL. But actually, there is object COBOL. But I think for Fortran community thinks itself as current. COBOL people think themselves as.
Yeah, I haven't used Fortran for almost 40 years now.
What you get on the Multics Fortran. Okay, so the interesting thing is that the idea of numbers as symbols, not as words, they're just bit strings. So forget the numeric properties. They're basically strings of zeros and ones. They're not really numbers anymore. And that's an interesting concept. Now the advantage of a string of zeros and ones, two key properties about them, or the digital properties, is you can regenerate them. So you hear, the old whisper brigade, but you can't hear it. Well, zeros and ones, you regenerate. It's either 0 or 1. As long as it doesn't fuzz out too far, you can bring it back. And the other characteristic then is you can preserve nuance. That the slight distinctions, if you get a slight distinction makes a difference, 1 bit in 1,000 makes a difference, well, you preserve that. And that's a remarkable property, because we're used to things turning to mush. I remember as a kid, you put enough crayons together, you always get brown. So a big breakthrough was John McCarthy. How many people know of John McCarthy? Okay. In 1958, he did 2 things. One of which was come up with the idea for time sharing. He's not really credited for that, but that was a major thing. The other thing was Lisp, where unlike Fortran, you were not manipulating numbers, you were manipulating symbols. And that's a very powerful concept. And today, a major programming language is basically Lisp. JavaScript is based on Scheme, which is based on Lisp. And some of the S expression stuff is actually going to be coming back soon. Which, it's sort of a triumph. People think it's new. It's actually, people think JavaScript is a toy language. It's actually becoming really a deep language. Yeah. Now, what else is based on zeros and ones? Well, Darwin basically had set up some requirements which are going to be satisfied by DNA, which is zeros and ones. And the nice thing about DNA is, there's some mutation, some variation. For the most part, though, it's remarkable how well it reproduces itself. So you detect vibrations in the jaw. Well, whatever that characteristic is, you preserve it, you reinterpret it. In other words, the bits don't have an intrinsic meaning, and that's what enables evolution by reinterpreting what it means. But you can preserve, the basis without having to know what it means. So this is part of what I'm getting to the basic philosophy thing, because it's the same thing as the internet as a lab. When you see a message between 2 endpoints, it has no meaning. So where does the meaning come from? And that's the thing really to think about. And the other thing about genes and things is the meaning is not in any particular packet, it's the whole. And this is, again, a lot of this comes from the same day work. That's why, you lose a few best efforts works. Best efforts means we don't have to have every packet. We just use the totality. It's like speech. You cut out the low frequencies you can understand, you cut out the high frequencies you can understand. The meaning is not localized. And this is something, that I haven't really seen discussed that much, but it's a very key idea. So you need the context to get the meaning of this not known context. And that's where the internet comes as a laboratory for this. That it's one thing to talk about DNA and things, people get very defensive. Talk about us as monkeys. I don't know. That's their problem. I have nothing. I like monkeys. I am, though. But we are. But so this intelligent endpoints give us a context for interpretation. Then your app knows the picture or not. Between the two endpoints, you just have zeros and ones. They're meaningless. And we don't worry. We can lose fragments. It doesn't matter. We get the gist of it. And it's a conversation. So if you lose a packet, say, what do you mean? Those are all ideas that you can look at purely technically, but you can also look at as deep philosophy. Now, what's interesting is you can put the concepts together. So I can ship a physical object across the network, and it doesn't exist between the endpoints. So this story tells, ship the toy truck I shipped across the country. My mother wanted me to ship it to my nephew across the country. I said it'll be there in an hour, and it was. Because I took the description of the truck, in this case, sent it to my brother, who then went to Radio Shack. How many people remember Radio Shack? And this crowd would. And bought the same truck. And the key philosophical point is understanding why that's the same truck. That for the purposes of this being the toy my mother wanted to give him, it is the same truck. So part of this is also accepting the idea that we can do things like move the name over. This is the operational meaning of same. Again, this is useful abstraction. And yet the truck is here now, it's there, and didn't exist in the middle. Now Star Trek, they did this, but they did the Kluge version. You don't ship people unless you've got a clone of your body stored. It's going to be hard to reconstruct from the description. And the reason people talk about that so hard is assuming you've got to send every bit of information. There's infinite. But if you bound the problem properly, it's easy. You send the instructions. You pre-stage the parts. It's a very pragmatic thing. We do it every day in business called logistics. What software does is it gives us the articulate understanding of these concepts so it can work with them. And then once you realize the solar system is just another construct. It's a cognitive construct we have for basically framing our understanding. There's no physical thing called the solar system. It's just another constellation in the sky. The ancients would use constellations to use it for navigation, organize star patterns. Solar system is just another pattern that's useful. And we don't need 11 to move a planet. We just rebind Pluto as a subplanet, and it's no longer a planet. So we can look at these either as one-time hacks, or we can see that they represent much deeper ideas. And the same in conversation. When we talk, we realize we each have a different interpretation context. There isn't one interpretation. So it's all of these concepts we can use, in day-to-day life once we have it. So the point about this is that there's a new literacy we need to embrace. That's these concepts which we're not really teaching yet. And we're having a discussion today online about teaching math and things. And this is really part of when we'll think of math too. We really want to teach concepts. Teaching arithmetic is not the point. Yet much of our math teaching is about the mechanics, which basically turns people off to math, when there are all these exciting concepts to learn. So so this is where the public policy comes together. Once you understand the public packet infrastructure builds on these ideas, because the telecom industry assumes knowledge is framed. You carry bits. I mean, the same for privacy policy today. You protect your information because your private information is little nuggets, and if you can keep them in a little box, you're safe. Of course, in the surveillance economy, people, they know everything about you by knowing your friends. They don't have to know anything about you personally, and they can triangulate. So that's the wrong model. But in terms of infrastructure, we need an infrastructure to enable these relationships, rather than trying to tax each conversation as if it's a physical thing, which is the current public policy, the freight policy. It's sort of like confusing money with gold, or as I call Bitcoin, virtual gold. So part of the thing is also, the other footnote here about the internet, is the internet started out as an internet-working project. It's not an internet-working project. That was punted. That used to be translating all the formats. Instead, we really have a topology of relationships that are independent of what's in the middle. That's really the outcome. We call it the internet, which confuses little children and network engineers, which are the same people. And we really have to think outside the networking process. Let me put it another way. We have to realize the word networking is ambiguous. Network as a service is something, is like, arranged marriages. You might want to pay for it, but you shouldn't have to. And the internet is more like social networking. So I put a lot of other notes. We want to discuss things, notes after notes. But since it's so late, questions, discussions, confusion, awakeness?
Yeah. So you didn't quote Minsky there. He was, Piaget and Papert were his mentors.
Oh yeah,
and
Papert was one of my mentors.
Oh really?
Yeah, I chose him to advise for a while. So yeah, so I mean, a lot of Papert was a major influence on me with this. So yes, definitely Papert. Of course, he was a student of Piaget.
All right.
So I don't know how much Marvin influenced Papert or vice versa.
Yeah.
But yes, that was the advice. I mean, for me, coming to MIT was fun because I got a chance to play with all these ideas, take psycholinguistics, get into language wars, realizing linguists didn't know what they're talking about. Noam Chomsky is a mathematician who should not be allowed to deal with people. We get into all these old battles, but yes, and one version of this is where I started a slide of Papert and on him too. It was just I had to cut this down to 4 minutes, so I cut that off. But yes, but the problem at MIT is I don't think the ideas are fully penetrated. The networking is still, the internet is still taught as a network. It's not real. This view I don't think is current. I'd like to get it into the discussion, but one of these days.
It seems to me like you want to identify yourself as an endpoint, and you want the other endpoint there's an endpoint you're trying to reach.
Yes.
And so identity of the individuals is important. And
well, identity is a very complex concept.
But in the physical world, it's not. Really.
No, it's totally.
You may have many identities to many people, but you are still the person you are. If I have met you and you have met me, we know each other's. In some sense,
no, I
now know who I want to talk to. I may not know your address or any of your addresses, but I now know the person I want to talk to.
Yeah, but this is a graph problem, right?
Well, let me give you. Okay. One thing again, when I get the implementation, I might assign you a grid. In other words, if I look you up and discover you, I might basically associate a grid with your physical instance and then try to find that, so find that. But I could also want to speak to any John Smith and not care which one. So there could be abstract endpoints. So physical endpoints are good, like the doorbell, simple examples. But we could generalize and think about endpoints very abstractly. Might be descriptive. This is what BitTorrent does. Or content-centered networking, which says, I want to describe the content, not that instance. So that's why it's such a complex concept.
Right. But whether it's, Yeah, when you're talking about physical objects, you gave the example of the truck, and you're right, that is interchangeable, but I as an individual are not interchangeable. Someone with my particular skill set might be interchangeable.
No, that's what I'm saying. It depends on the
But
context.
I am not interchangeable.
It depends on the context and purpose, is what I'm saying. So, I agree. There are times when I look you up and everything, I assign a GUID to you, so I'll get the same you every time. But I'm just saying that's not the only way to describe an endpoint. That's just one particular case. It's very useful.
Broadcast that only needs to go to one
Which-
entity.
speak
It's
louder.
like a broadcast that only needs to go to one entity. Like, whose phone is this that I just found?
No, that's what,
Unicast.
and there's a whole thing, when I was in Microsoft, the UPnPI design, not the stupid one they have now, basically, separated out, basically the rendezvous, how do you find what you want, and then identify the endpoints, and then there's a question of, you don't want to talk about security, the trust relationships.
That was the next step, yes.
So, and I might trust you fully, and you might be wrong. So just because I trust you doesn't mean I made the right decision. So all these things, so if you solve any of them fully, you've got to maintain the ambiguity. And in the social system, we have some heuristics we use for who to trust. They don't always work. And this is why...
But we don't trust each other fully either. I trust my mom to make a great meal, but I'm not going to go to her for economic advice. It's the trust is a contextual as well.
No, I agree.
I'm going to be willing to send you my heart rate data, but I'm not going to send you my bank account
No,
information.
or the way I put it, the people you trust with your life, but not your money. That's part of the problem here. Is we have heuristics like, if you're in my tribe, I'll trust you. But we also know how easily, that's what, in conning somebody, it comes the word confidence. You basically hijack the trust mechanisms.
Well, going back to the firewall thing, firewalls are, you're either completely trusted because you're on one side of the firewall, or you're on the other side of the firewall and you're extremely untrusted.
I agree.
But in reality, it should be application specific.
That's why I said I'm using this for now. But it's a terrible mechanism. It was an accident of history. I go to why people confuse the kludge.
I agree, firewalls are horrible.
Yes, Andrei Marchanov basically made a mistake because he knew it was a temporary hack and you have to do armies, but then he foolishly died. Just like John Pastel screwed up the DNS. He understood it, but then he died. So number one, don't die at the wrong time. But yes, so people then glom onto the simplistic version of it, just like telecom. The idea of messages of freight. We charge phone calls as if they were little telegrams being sent in a series, messages. Now people have currency called minutes, because that's the way the phone. So there's a tendency to pile on and build on accidental properties. And I'm forced to sort of, try to program around it. That's the point of the doorbell thing, was I can overlay this, just like the internet overlays the current phone network. It doesn't mean it's ideal, but it allows you to move forward by basically reconfiguring or a different decomposition. But once you do that, and this is why I'm struggling to sort of explain the idea you want a public packet infrastructure rather than a telecom system. I mean, this idea of frequency making radio frequency bands property is absurd. I mean, we had Royal Purple for a while. I can go into why spectrum allocation is a terrible idea and all this, but yes, there's so many of these ideas, so I have to find ways of explaining it. So the doorbell thing is just a way of explaining it, and then have you understand how that saves lives, whereas remote surgery, the 5G story, is murder. But which will play better in the press? So yes, any help or suggestion how to, explain that? At some point, I do need to find is to maybe give a CSAT talk or something.
Yep.
So other questions or comments? But I should, with all the neuroscience people, there, a lot of it also comes from that world. Brain, you know, understand how the brain works. Okay, hopefully I've entertained people. In the meantime, it's fun to build stuff.
Thank you.
Hey Bob, can you send me a copy of the slides for our website?
Next month, we're gonna be in room, I think, 149 downstairs, the first floor.
Okay.
What?
Next month, we're gonna be downstairs.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The big room?